Hey, everybody out there in Project Liberal Land. We are going to be streaming today. Going to be playing something a little bit different. Going to be doing some uh, s- Stellaris, but it is heavily modified. It is the Total Conversion mod, one of the two Star Trek mods, Star Trek New Horizons, inside Stellaris. So we'll be hanging out, playing a little bit of that today, chatting with anyone who pops in from our Project Liberal volunteers and staff, chatting with folks who jump in on any of the platforms that we are on, and throw into the chat there. And otherwise, just generally hanging out and enjoying. So what I've decided to do for this, because one thing I'll say about this mod for Stellaris is it can be really slow going at the start. So I've already kind of burned through several years establishing ourselves over here in the corner of the map. We're gonna be playing the Gorn, these lovely lizard dudes out here. Any Trekkies will be familiar with. But yeah, so we'll be rocking through that. Uh, Chatting with anybody who happens to be around and pops in. You know, these things from previous chats can sometimes end up getting, you know, a little bit deep in the weeds on some topics that our Project Liberal community cares about, and I'm always happy to go deep in the weeds. We can keep things light and airy too, and that's totally fine. We can just talk about Star Trek and talk about the game if we're hanging out here. But I do think that I'm inclined to wax philosophical at least some of the time about some of the things going on in the world here. But we'll get started gaming initially and then roll from there. So, one of the reasons that this is an interesting point for us to jump in is the Klingons over here have been threatening us for a while. So, our spy networks are now reporting that we're about 2 years from a pretty big war on more or less equal terms. So I'm mostly going to tidy things up, check my star bases, beef up our fleet a little bit, and then just get ready for any outbreak of hostilities that might happen. It's For those who don't play Stellaris, it's kind of like a 4X style game. You sort of paint the galaxy. It's from Paradox Studios, who does a bunch of map painters. I'm a huge nerd for a lot of their map painter stuff, Europa Universalis, Hearts of Iron, those sorts of games, grand strategy type games. And and yeah, Stellaris is pretty much that in space, and it has a fantastic modding community that's created a bunch of wonderful mod content, including stuff for total nerds like me, and you know, adapting the Star Trek universe, adapting the Star Wars universe, adapting all kinds of things. So let's beef up our fleet here a little bit, just so that we're not caught totally flat-footed, and then we can go from there. Ah, Mr. Singh, I see you've joined me in chat here as well. How are you, sir?
Hello.
How are you doing tonight?
Yeah, I'm alright, just a little bit sick,
Oh, that's
but
not fun.
eh, clearly isn't, getting better. So
Good.
yeah, Gorn hegemony.
So we're have dropped the Peggle for now and have picked up a wonderful Star Trek mod for the game Stellaris, which is like a big space 4X. So I figured I would grind that out in the
I
background
play
while we wait.
Stellaris. Don't worry.
Oh, good. Ah, fellow. Are you a Stellaris fan specifically, or a fellow Paradox fan
I
in
am
general?
a Wargaming fan in general, so like
Yes.
Paradox, Matrix
Uh
games,
huh.
lots of stuff.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, I
What you?
definitely I love
Uh,
all that stuff. So I'm happy to do a lot of that.
so what's the current situation, Captain?
Well, so
Starlog here.
That's right. So I've managed to jump ahead. I kind of off stream played a bunch of the sort of slow opening phase of this is the Strange New Worlds mods, one of the two mods that are Star Trek Total Conversion mods for Stellaris. And so we're jumping in about the year 2204 looks like just rolled around, and the Klingons are threatening to go to war with us at the end of next year. So we'll see if those threats are real. Um, I'm just trying to beef up and prep for that. We have about parity with them.
What?
It looks like so.
Hmm.
So we're about equivalent across the board. So it should be a fair fight. They bullied me a little in the early game, but we've ramped up now.
Yeah.
So we should be able to stand our ground, or at least make an attempt to. So yeah, just trying to bulk stuff out here. How's everything going in your world,
Hard.
man?
It goes. It goes. Just the usual stuff, nothing big. And
So the big
you know,
I don't know if it's the big news here. It certainly I don't know that it's big, but we have I live just outside of DC, and so we are now the reflecting pool in front of the DC monument.
at peace with Iran.
What's that?
I heard peace with Iran and also algae in the
Yeah, I was going to
like
talk about the algae and the reflecting
reflecting
pool
pool.
because peace with Iran is one of those things that we've heard so many times, and it's kind of
Mm.
like I'm inclined now when we have a deal with Iran to just let it sit and see if it remains a deal with Iran for any amount of time, before before the ceasefire is broken almost immediately. We've been through several ceasefires. It does look like this one might be sticky, but I could be embarrassing myself by saying that, very easily.
I mean, seemingly it's sticking because Iran, from what I've heard, they're offering $300 billion to Iran, and Iran already is. I feel like what Iran is gonna do is it'll take the $300 billion, and using those $300 billion, it will either buy, Chinese premium bonds, or, invest somewhere in the debt market
hmm
that will be dominated by China and get some credit to actually rebuild itself, rebuild its military forces, and also rebuild its,
Yeah, I mean,
nuclear
I
program.
don't see a reason why Iran would not be predisposed to take the deal, and then even if it falls apart at some point, right? It's just like wait for the check to clear. You're no worse off. This is basically a U.S. surrender terms at this point. Like the U.S. is not getting out of this war the
Yeah,
victor, so there's no reason to say no to it. And then if hostilities resume, they resume, but from Iran's perspective, it's all upside as far as I can tell. I mean, there's some pretense that they're making concessions, but that's largely going back to concessions that they had already made prior to the start of the war.
yeah. I mean, this doesn't really win anything. Just, you know,
Yeah.
it does feel like a surrender because I don't know what the hell America is getting other than, I mean, Trump says that it's a memorandum of understanding, and if he doesn't like it, it's gonna go back to shooting them, dropping bombs right in the middle of their head. Although I feel like there is a lot of, let's just say, how do I describe it? I do feel like this one will stick mostly because of because Trump will try to curb inflation, and the bigger picture for Trump, that is, keeping inflation in check, keeping his allies in power, that is, Russia and
Yeah.
others, because if Iran can take a toll to the Straits, that means all prices are gonna go up. It's gonna go up in, you know, South Asia, Southeast Asia, West Asia, because a lot of the oil comes through that route. And Trump has a lot of allies there. Now, where are they going to go? They're going to buy Russian oil. And who's a bigger ally of Trump than Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think just even domestic politics, it's easier for me to understand what Trump gets out of this deal than it is to understand what America gets out of this deal. Like, I don't think America gets much. I think Trump personally is at a point where political support has been so eroded by this, including amongst groups that were core supporters of his, that just getting Iran out of the headlines is a huge win for him. So, like, if he can put a period at the end of the sentence and move on to whatever the next debacle is, I think I understand that mission for him. It comes at America's expense, I think, but I understand that mission for him, where that the deal does do that if it can hold, where we eventually don't have to talk about Iran every day because we're not actively dropping bombs on people, as you say, and there's a return to some sort of vague status quo. And then we can just go on to talk about algae and reflecting pools and MMA matches on the White House lawn and like the continuing desecration of our civic religious spaces. But maybe not.
Yeah, I do feel like this is very. Now, this is going to come off as a bit psychotic,
Mm-hmm.
but I do often feel like we're focusing on the wrong stuff, you know? Like
Yeah.
algae in pool and, you know, UFC matches on the White House. These are bread and circuses. This is what Trump's want. This is what Trump wants you to focus on, keep talking about. And it takes away from the real issues Americans are facing right now. Like in Oklahoma, for example, they recently refused to increase the minimum wage, despite, you know, Tulsa and Oklahoma City are the two places in Oklahoma that are being hit the worst with the recent inflation and cost of living crisis. But other than Tulsa and Oklahoma City, people outside of those places mm, overwhelmingly voted no to increase the minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
And that is causing problems because already the guy on the assembly line, as we say, is not getting paid enough. And then there comes the issue of not increasing the minimum wage, and the guy on the assembly line themselves being against the increasing of the minimum wage due to the political landscape permitting a more, let's just say, anti working class sentiment, especially in Oklahoma. I have lived in Stillwater for a bit, so I
Mm-hmm.
know the Stillwater is a nicer place, but Stillwater, but you know, get it once you're out of Stillwater, out of Tulsa, out of Oklahoma City, it's mostly wilderness, and I would not love to be out there at night because I mean that's pretty obvious why. But I do feel like a lot of this is bread and circuses. This
Mm-hmm.
is all to distract us from the real pressures, the real issues American citizens, the common man is facing. We shouldn't let Trump go, but I think there needs to be a shift from promising sanity to also like having a plan
Mm-hmm.
for what we're gonna do once Trump is gone. I would like if I were a Democratic Party, like, you know, planner or something, I definitely want to check in on the working class vote because there has to be some way to break there, right? FDR did it, Nixon did it, LBJ did it, fucking Reagan did it. So there must be some way. to break through all the internet dominated, stuff like, memes and that, to break through that and get to the, you know, rank and file young man and tell him, hey, immigrants aren't your enemy. The woke
Mm-hmm.
isn't your enemy. DEI isn't your enemy. Your true enemy is this inflation, this crisis that we're having, and the orange man up top, and trillionaires that have been, you know, targeting what is essentially money that's greater than countries. And it's insane because that money isn't being used. Elon Musk is not like other billionaires where, or even the current, like the billionaire class we talk about, is not like the billionaire class of the old. Where, money didn't stay static.
Right.
The money was invested, reinvested, taxation took that money and gave it into the hands of the state, which then invested into state, you know, what the state is supposed to do. Healthcare, education, because the entire social contract of why we need a state is so we can provide these infrastructure, this I'm sorry, I'm a bit sick, so my words are a bit slurred.
That's fine.
Infrastructure, a good standard of living, law and order. This is the stuff the state is supposed to provide. And taxation is how, you know, we pay for it. Taxation, bonds, and whatever the money state lends and all that stuff. It's
Mm-hmm.
complicated, but I do feel like we need to somehow convince the working man this is the real issue. And the thing is, the current internet culture has infantilized the working man. It has infantilized our youth into believing a distorted reality. Like, it boggles me. It boggles me. How can people watch someone as brain dead and stupid as Asmongold, and he nets millions of viewers every stream? There are young men, children as young as 14, watching him, thinking he is a role model to follow. People who watch stuff on the manosphere, who watch, podcasts like whatever, Joe Rogan. And I feel like we have forgotten how to read. I was, I was talking with someone. I I do a lot of role play, tabletop role playing,
Uh-huh.
especially in the Gundam community.
Uh-huh.
So someone there did not know the meaning of polemic, and they called me like, that stop using grok. It's a word salad. I'm like, this isn't a word salad. It's plain English. That I polemic is a harsh argument against anything you're saying. And I realize the modern man has been infantilized, has been made subject to data mining algorithms and YouTube and content rather than literature. Like when I was young, I'm not that old, but even when I was young, my parents got me books, all right? They got
Mm-hmm.
me the
Sure.
classics, they got me books, they got me stuff like, David Copperfield, a lot of Dickens works. And I when I was a teenager, I read a lot. I read Terry Pratchett. I read a lot of the Discworld books. I
Mm-hmm.
read Neil Gaiman. Never. I still have my copy of Neverwhere. I read Dostoevsky. I have my copy of, you know, a lot of stuff by him. The Brothers Karamazov, White Knights, his experiences with the Russian underground, a lot of stuff. And as I grew older, I read more philosophy. Like, I read Immanuel Kant, I read the Critique of Pure Reason, the Critique of Practical Reason, his three great critiques. I read Hegel, I read, you know, Mills, Bentham, Rawls, the thing I felt at that moment and looking at the world around me is I was given a proper education by my parents. I was given the tools. I was raised to read, to value education, to value true intellectualism over either far intellectualism or, pseudo intellectualism, the likes of which people like, Jordan Peterson espouse. I listened to Jordan Peterson when I was young, and I thought half of the stuff he spoke was utter bullshit, right? Like, and I knew Ben Shapiro and all these people, they weren't intelligent. They just used intelligent sounding words. They had this veneer of intellectual conversations, but the reality is they did not know shit. I do not use profanity often, but this is an exception because I recently have just been so frustrated with a lot of things, and this is one of them. I do feel like our youth in not only the United States, but in the UK, very especially considering what's going on in Northern Ireland, you
Mm-hmm.
know, kids as young as 15 and 16 putting buildings on fire, killing people, stopping people in the street. I have family there.
Oh, it's
They
horrific
told
to
me
see what
they're
was happening in
literally
Northern Ireland. That was horrifying.
exactly. I have family that called my parents. They were scared.
Mm-hmm.
They told them they're literally stopping people's cars and checking their IDs. They're checking who's in there, and doing, they're beating them up. They're giving threats. It's horrifying what's going on there. And it's, I do feel that in a way, this is going to happen everywhere if we do not take control of the youth, if we do not dispel the poison that is being given to our youth, that is being fed to them as the only solution to their problems. We need to take back the working man, the youth, the majority. And the only way we're going to do that, in my opinion, is to first get them off the internet. Because I feel like the internet has rotted a lot of brains. Like, even myself, I feel whenever I'm like reading a new book, I'm not as fast as I used to be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as efficient as I used to be in reading at remembering things. So I do feel like then because of that, I would begin cutting off from the internet a little bit by bit, slowly, getting back into my old paradigm of just reading books, reading articles, staying on my computer rather than on my phone. But, you know, my neuroticisms aside, I do feel that we do need a push for more intellectually minded man, for a more gentle man, as they say.
Well, so and I
Revive.
want to I
Mm,
want to explore. I want to try to remember to come back and ask you some questions about unplugging because I think that that's an interesting train of thought too. But exploring kind of what you're saying, in the U.S., I think one of the Democratic Party, at least in terms of the sort of DC Democratic Party establishment types, the sort of Democratic Party think tank land. Uh, there is definitely an emphasis on the working class, almost an obsessive emphasis on the working class, because the working class people were such a part of the Democratic coalition before Trump, and Trump has won them so thoroughly. I do think where the thing that we lose track of in the United States is that the United States is not really a working class country. I mean, it is in the sense that a lot of people like to think of themselves as working class, but would more traditionally be what we would think of as sort of white collar work. true like blue
Mhm.
collar on the factory floor type of proletarian labor organizing working class people are like maybe 10 to 13% of workers in the United States. It really is very small. You can add to that then of course agricultural work, which is another percentage that is far from a majority. uh, so most Americans, when you're talking about engaging them politically, the tools of like really traditional like early 20th century labor organizing, it's not really the right toolbox. But I think the
Yeah,
huge
it isn't.
insight in what you're saying is like how do we fight this intellectual versus anti-intellectual fight that is so important, and that does seem to have like a really strong partisan divide when you look at Trump. And just using education as a proxy for intellectualism, people who are more highly educated uh, overwhelmingly break against Trump over and over and over again. And even Trump, says, hey, stupid people like me, I love the uneducated. It's like how you could even talk to your base
Yeah,
that way and have your base tolerate it. I don't understand. But he's not wrong in that evaluation. Like you look at polling, and exit polling really supports that. Is, the more uneducated you are, along with the more rural you are, the more male you are, and the more white you are, the more likely you are to support Trump and support MAGA. And so I don't have the answer, but I think it's the right question to be asking. How do we get people in love with ideas again culturally? Get people, uh, ex- get, how do we foster the sort of cultural mindset that, uh, wants to be engaged in thinking and who respects
hmm,
people who are engaged in thinking. And that's a tough question. But if you crack that, you solve a lot of political problems alongside the cultural ones, because I think underneath the numbers, that's a huge part of what the Trump movement is about and what
yeah,
defeating the Trump movement is about.
yeah. I do feel like America does have a sense of anti-intellectualism, more so born out of a frontier
Mm.
culture. Because if you really look, but even then, I feel like the current trend of anti-intellectualism is worse because even if we look at frontier culture, right? Your average, like, frontiersman, cowboy, etc. We're talking merely in terms of white people because even they were not this dumb, right? When, they were often, when they went to church, they didn't just study the Bible, they studied also the classics,
Oh,
Aristotle,
sure.
Plato. They studied philosophy, they studied physics, they studied basic economics. The education system back then, and that was required to survive not only in the wilderness, but also to make a living for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Then, as capitalism, industrialization came forward, education in the end became a tool for social mobility. If you were born, like, let's just take the most obvious example that we can have. Lyndon B. Johnson
Mm-hmm.
came from a really poor family, a working class family, and he
Yep.
became the president of the United States.
And a
If
working
you
class
can,
family in
hmm,
Texas too, right? A Southern family.
yeah,
Yeah.
the whenever someone tells me that, America is a country dominated by the elites, I always point out to LBJ as an example
Mm-hmm.
that despite the illusion of the dominant elite, there has always been and there always will be social mobility. There will be people who will be able to, come from humble origins and have the potential to become the president of the United States. And I do feel like it's one of the reasons why education is so dissuaded in a lot of the rural and deep south because if people were more educated, they'll be less likely to support irrational policies, policies that do not favor them but favor the elites, which is one of the reasons not only the Republicans but even the Democrats haven't focused much there, even though they focus on the working class, sort of, but they don't. When we talk about the working class in the modern context of America, we're talking about like your average American, white American, because in the end, the white American decides elections, even to this day. And I do feel like a lot of like we can foster a culture of thinking by incentivizing to, because earlier education was incentivized as a form of social mobility. Like, back in those days, if you somehow got a degree in like let's just even talk about the 50s and 60s.
Hmm.
You got a degree in law, you got a degree in electrical engineering, boom, straight to Texas Instruments or Siemens or Hewlett Packard, whatever, IBM, Bell Labs. You were destined for there. You were able to make enough money to live comfortably, to ensure a good education for your students, afford proper health care, you know, basically you're set for life. We need to re-incentivize that. Currently, we have so many degree holders, but we do not have jobs for them. We need to create systems that create those incentives for education so that it does not just remain
Yeah.
what
Well,
it
and
just.
it's the other way we see that manifest, I think, is there's this huge emphasis in conservative spaces on not just eroding and eliminating public education services, but then encouraging people to pull their kids into homeschooling schemes and stuff like that. Part of that, I think, touches on what you're talking about. I think there's another important aspect of it that's about controlling a religious education and ensuring your kids come up in this fundamentalist religious bubble. Given how influential and important white evangelicals are within Trump's coalition and the GOP, I think that's a big
Yeah.
part of it too. But it's synergistic, right? So you can accomplish both those goals at once. It's sort of like the one neat trick, right? It's you can you're both sort of eroding and attacking those institutions that provide a more egalitarian education. I don't mean educating on egalitarian principles. I mean egalitarian access to education, and at the same time, kind of feeding the biases and natural tendencies of the base. So it's a no-brainer for the GOP to pursue that. I don't know. I mean, other than Democrats obviously have a long history of promoting public education, I'm not sure how to frame that in a way that breaks through that bubble to sort of white, rural, evangelical Americans in a way that they're going to value, because the alternative is this homeschool argument that's been promoted so aggressively.
I mean, in the end, arguments are arguments, right? And they need some strong backing. Right now, unemployment is one of the bigger issues in the United States. There are more people unemployed or underemployed. We don't talk much about
Yeah.
underemployment in the United States, because it's mostly a third world thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like slowly it is bleeding into the United States,
Absolutely.
where people who deserve a certain position are not there economically, or because of not being paid as much. Like, you know a person who has a bachelor of arts in history should not be working as a McDonald's. They
Right.
should be working as a researcher. They should be studying, they should be going through primary sources, they should be, you know bringing out these exciting new perspectives on history. But the jobs simply are not there, because we do not have the infrastructure to support those jobs. We need that infrastructure. We need to somehow incentivize institutions, incentivize systems, to incentivize education overall, and show to those rural conservatives that if you do not pursue the proper education for your children, for your progeny, you're going to be stuck there. If you pursue a good education, not only will your children be able to afford a higher standard of living, not only will they be have a better life, have a better job, they'll be happy, they'll be more fulfilled, you will benefit from it because your own social standing will increase. You'll no longer be stereotyped as a hillbilly. You'll be a proper, respected member of the society because of your children. It's something that I kind of see in India, where a lot of people from rural background try to
Mm-hmm.
go for send their children to the cities for education, mostly for the similar purposes of social mobility and stuff. And the more I stay here, the more I realize slowly that the problems the United States face and the problems that India faces, in essence, are not very different. In essence, in the sense that the root cause,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's obviously way more complicated than that, but the similarities I see and the perspectives I see here can maybe benefit a lot of the perspectives there, because in India we have a similar problem with the rural majority favoring right-wing and conservative arguments, and keeping this semi-feudal poverty, people keeping people in semi-feudal poverty based on their caste. Like, even if you're rich, you're not that well educated. Yes, you're not supposed to be. And I mean, and if you map that to rural United States, it's almost similar. Like, for an example, I will take the Indian state of Bihar. In India, they call it a Bimaru state. That means a sick state. A lot of efforts have been made to turn Bihar upside down, but they've all failed because there exists a almost nearly feudal structure where the countryside is basically tearing itself apart. Wars between a feudal elite that has actual militia, even though gun ownership is illegal in India,
Hmm.
they have guns, they have power, they have money, and they use that against people from lower social stature, the lower caste, to keep them in line. And the lower castes, you know, unable to, with nothing left to lose, they turn to stuff like communism or socialism, and they form their own militias, and they clash with the upper caste and their militia, and it's just a never-ending conflict. No matter how much money you put into that, unless you address that institution, that structural issue, you're not going to go anywhere. So even if we can see that in California, where the cities may be overwhelmingly Democrat, overwhelmingly filled with better people, they have their problems. And if you go to more rural areas of California, it's the same as the rural areas of Oklahoma, or the rural areas of Texas, or Montana, or wherever you go.
Mm-hmm.
It's the almost the same paradigm that we see. So I do feel like we need to address the structural issues that has led to this stratification. If the Democrats can crack this, they would have cracked American politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, yeah, we're getting a little utopian with that, right? Because I think if anybody cracks that, they crack American politics. But I'm a little bit, uh, I'm a little bit more pessimistic as to the extent to which a lot of those divides are healable and solvable. But I do think that politics, especially in liberal democracies, right? One of the strengths of liberal democracy is we have this sort of process of arbitrage where we have these different perspectives and these different value systems and these seemingly incompatible worldviews, and we can come together through a process that we can all agree to respect, a process where we come together and work these differences out in a way that's temporary, in a way that's iterative, in the way that we come back to it because we recognize the solution's never going to be perfect and sometimes is not even going to be good, and that we're going to come back and iterate and re-engage each other and come through that process together. I think the lack of understanding and the lack of faith in that is something that has, for a lot of reasons, and we can have a big long conversation about foreign influence from more liberal regimes in bringing this about. We can have a conversation about failed education, like we're talking about, a conversation about domestic bad actors, about influencer culture, about technology, communications technology through social media being this revolutionary thing that we weren't ready for. But I think that, for all of those reasons baking into the soup, what we have is we have this real sense, I think, in the United States right now, that core element of our social fabric, that belief in democracy as a problem-solving instrument, is something that's not just eroded with a big group of people, but directly under attack, and is now sort of like a social signaling device of saying, oh, look at me, I'm one of the cool ones that thinks democracy should fail. And you see that gaining huge traction on the political right and just broadly in rural communities, and some of these communities that are increasingly bought into this idea that they just need separatism, right? That the problem is the city. They shouldn't even be a part of the same state as the big city in their state, right? Because that doesn't represent their interests.
Yeah.
So the only answer is this particularism where everything spins apart. And I think, the 250 years that America has endured, it's endured through really horrendous failures of its system. But it's endured by turning back into that system and saying, we're going to work these problems out democratically. We're going to work these problems out through our institutions. And so I worry about that. Like, to me, that's the core cultural shift that's a major problem. And maybe it dovetails, at least in terms of social media, with what you talked about earlier, and I wanted to get back to about you unplugging. So what are some of the ways that you've kind of pulled yourself back from being online, and what is the effect that that's had sort of on your life, if I can ask?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the reasons I pulled, like, the first thing I did, I took my old phone, like, really old.
Mm-hmm.
That phone has been with me since 2017. I bought a new one a couple of years ago. But I took that old phone. It's slow. It's absolute horrendous to work with. But you can call someone with it, and you can have, essential services like uh DoorDash or, you know, Google Maps, all that. I just keep all the essential services on that phone and keep that with me at all times. And when I have to, like, you know, scroll a bit, watch YouTube, or do that, I go to what I call my crack phone, which
Mm.
is like, this is my recreational phone, and I have like, I won't use my recreational phone for more than 30 minutes or an hour.
That's
Other
really
than that,
smart. So
I'm
you
just
can take that and you can put that away, and you're not unplugged from the sort of necessary in finger quotes uh, parts of, the modern world in terms of connectivity. You're not disconnected
yeah,
from, all the things you need to be connected from, but you are able to unplug from that purely recreational, endless scroll of content.
yeah.
That's really
I
cool.
do feel like it's difficult
Mm-hmm.
because, sometimes you're like, oh, you get a bit skittish sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
where you're like, oh, I need my phone. But, after some time, that skittishness just goes away. And, there'll be times when I'll just grab my phone and I'll be like, oh, I should scroll YouTube. But then I realize, oh, don't have YouTube in this, and I keep it back.
Yeah.
uh, that had happened an uncomfortable amount of times, but unplugging did genuinely help me. It helped me to think because I do have a Patreon where I weekly publish stories.
Hmm.
It's like sort of and I mean, it's not like I get any money from it. I'm doing it for the love of the game. I barely get like $5 from it, and
Plug
it
it here.
gave me a.
Somebody could be watching who's interested. Give it a plug. Where can I find it?
All right, sure. If you wanna like go to my stories and everything, I'll link them. There's a lot of short stories up there. You
Okay.
can read them for free. It's absolutely free. If you want to access your Discord and everything, you gotta pay up. But otherwise, it's like mostly. I'll put up in volunteer chat for now, and
All right, so there you
let
go.
me
It'll go up
just.
in volunteer chat. Anybody who comes across this conversation and wants to check it out, you got to become a Project Liberal volunteer, which you do by going to the Project Liberal Discord and letting us know that you're interested in volunteering. That's the price of admission to get that link.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to it. I'll
Yeah.
definitely check it out.
Thank you. It's also like it's not just me. It's also my partner
Hmm.
who. So basically, how we work is we basically what we do is I write a story, they edit, they write a story, I edit,
Ah,
and we like sort of accompany each other
mm-hmm.
in synergy to really make our stories work. So yeah, it's kind of like that. And oh Jesus, I realized I forgot to add a story into a collection despite. Let me just do that after that.
Great. Let's see. Who says this isn't a productive stream? While you're taking care of that, I will point out that our war with the Klingons started promisingly and has turned into an absolute just meat grinder slugfest back and forth with the different fleets, which is unfortunate. I may have tried to engage on their territory a little too early here, but oof.
Yeah,
So
I've been watching your
we're
fleets getting.
definitely hitting a rebuilding phase here where the fleet needs to recover. I do think we've been getting the better of the exchanges. Yeah, we've actually downgraded their relative fleet power, at least according to our espionage network, which is pretty strong, so I believe it. Downgraded their fleet power um, below ours. But in this mod, the Klingon Empire particularly has all of these internal great houses that have their own independent fleets and support it in war. So there's just all of these like 1,000 fleet power, 2,000 fleet power fleets that just do so much like little chip damage across time. It can be really tough to deal with. So that's where we are. I see we're still not getting rest. They seem to be just sending fleets into us to attrit us down. So we've got Space Bakhmut here on the Klingon front. I'm afraid
Space Bakhmut. Amazing.
yeah, so that's that's what we're dealing with now. I'll try to break that paradigm where I can, but that's unfortunately where we've ground to in the game.
Yeah.
All right. We also lost like one of our most senior commanders in that grind fest that was happening over here in the Mempa sector.
Damn.
And so our fleets are well, let's just say there's upward mobility if you're in the Gorn Navy right now.
Yeah, there's like this would have been much better if only that commander were here.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, I'm sure he'd have pulled it through. All right, let's just plus everything up a
Right.
bit. Small ships will come out
I'll put the
faster.
link in
Yeah, do
volunteer
that.
chat
I
and
look
just
forward to that.
And just so people in the stream, because we are liberals, we do not gatekeep people. I'll just put it up in the stream as well.
Great, yeah,
if people want to read to my
absolutely.
works, and because so one of the stories I've been working on. I'm sorry, I'm gonna now
No,
harp on
please.
about one of the stories of the.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about them.
So there's this alternate history, like, universe that I created. I have been working on this since like I was a wee teenager, which is like, what if Alexander the Second, the reformer czar,
Mm-hmm.
was not assassinated, and history went a bit differently than it went, in our timeline.
Uh-huh.
So basically, that became the genesis of what I call the Broken Pawns universe. And the alternate history aspect and it's it's basically liberal propaganda at that. You can say that
Well, I
because
was gonna say, do you have a then successfully, gradually, peacefully liberalizing Russia, that then comes into the 20th century as a sort of increasingly liberal, increasingly market focused, increasingly democratic state, or do you envision things having gone differently than that?
in the universe things do go a bit differently because, for one, Russia did liberalize,
Mm-hmm.
but it also fell to the communists. But because of that liberalization, the particular cult of personality that was associated with Russia doesn't really exist. So they're not communist in the sense that, Stalinist communism and its
Mm-hmm.
strands. It's more so like, we're just state capitalists with a different coat of paint, kind of like Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the thing is, in the future, that communist state, rather than, becoming what Marx thought communism would be, just gradually liberalizes into a liberal democracy in all but name. And this happens mostly because of the fact that there is no ideological enemy for them anymore. The West, so the Nazis in this universe got defeated way earlier. They were because the Maginot Line extended up to Belgium, you know, all over that. So the Nazi advance into France stalled in northern France. They were able to get deep, but they're defeated.
So you've gone pretty
And,
deep with
you
compounding
know,
ripples out. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I Because I've been working on this for long, and a summary does not give it justice.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
I
I wouldn't expect
Because
it
the
to,
20th
certainly.
century, the way it plays out is so different. Although one of the side stories I'm writing right now focuses more on India, and more
Uh-huh.
so on how basically what happens in India is that rather than the British leaving after World War II and India achieving its freedom by practically having only peaceful protests, there's a military coup that leads to a violent civil war, a colonial conflict that eventually leads to India's freedom. But the issue is, it does not, because one of the reasons India is very politically stable, but there has been no culture of political, like,
Mm-hmm.
proper violence. Like, oh, we can just overthrow the government. Oh, we can do that. Because, however, now that India has that, there exists the path India went to is almost eerily very similar to what South Korea went to. There are military coups, there's political instability, but then comes a leader who decides, you know what, screw this. We're going to establish liberal institutions. We're going to establish a proper liberal state in India. And that leads to a tremendous surge in the standard of living. a tremendous improvement in the situation, but history has a destiny of its own. You cannot simply wish the issues away. And that lies at the heart of the storyline. It's a like sort of like a neo-noir thriller, but it's very political in the sense the writings of Michel Durand were,
Hmm.
the Swiss thriller writer. I am. You probably would not have even heard of that guy. I literally used to own his entire collection. My dad gifted it to me, and it was like people say Sherlock Holmes, Miss
Hmm.
Marple,
Right.
Agatha Christie, and Arthur Conan Doyle. They never went into crime the way Michel Durand did.
Hmm.
Michel Durand went into crime with such a wide lens, with such great, like, it makes me just feel so bad that that guy isn't more well, known compared to, Doyle and
I
Christie, because
may have to check him out. The because you're right, I'm not familiar particularly. But yeah, I mean,
yeah,
you raise interesting questions, right? Talking about like the nature by which sort of a country gains independence and that sort of national myth making starts to take root. Uh, that obviously has a significant role in shaping how that country then conceives of itself, the relationship it has with its own political institutions, how it thinks of political violence and political change. Uh, and yet, I mean, America had a pretty violent revolution, right?
yeah,
And we have certainly had political violence. We had our own civil war, but across 250 years, we have had relatively stable institutions and relatively rare periods where political violence felt really present and prominent. And that's something that's I think worth reflecting on, given the fact that we
yeah,
started out literally melting the king's statues into musket balls, right?
yeah. Even this surprises me. Like, the American Civil War kind of doesn't, but the, Pax Americana that
Hmm.
followed the American Civil War surprises,
Right.
because it's not like all of the issues of America were faded away. In fact, I would say you do know about the riots in Oklahoma, like, Greenwood, Archer, and
Yep.
Pine
Hmm.
streets, the Tulsa riots.
Right.
And there was violence, there was a culture of violence, but it was the first time rather than America, breaking itself apart, decided to institutionally fix that issue of racism and introduce civil rights, which
Hmm.
was actually very surprising to me, because before that America had solved these deep-seated issues through violence, like the literal revolution that birthed America, and after fourscore and 7 years the Civil War. But then comes this period of relative stability and peace domestically,
Hmm.
because even even in, like, before the Civil War there was the war with Mexico, and bringing Texas, Oregon, California, and Trail of Tears. Violence was a very potent, like, tool that was used. But
Absolutely.
then came the post Civil War era, with Reconstruction and then Jim Crow, and then, the Gilded Age. And we saw that rather than America stoop down to revolution, America rather chose to trust in its liberal institutions, to put faith in the process of arbitration and compromise, rather than going for you know what, we're gonna have another civil war, which in the end is a testament to the liberal institutions themselves and how they facilitated that culture rather than going for violence, which
Hmm.
is another,
No, I'm
it's interesting.
yeah, I mean absolutely. And I don't want to oversimplify things and pretend that there was a, you know, there were certainly very I mean the Indian Wars that followed the American Civil War, you know, in the West. Most people know Custer's Last Stand, but that's part of a whole series of
Yeah,
campaigns against American natives that, you know, were the direct application of very violent instruments towards political ends, and to claim large swaths of territory and things like that. But it is remarkable to me not how much violence is in the American story, because I know so many other countries have stories that are vastly more violent. But, you know, given how we started, how little there actually is, and certainly in the 20th century, political violence was something that was certainly present in the civil rights struggles that, you know, that we had, but it has mostly disappeared as a feature of American politics, and it's sort of like it's threatened reemergence through ICE raids and you know you know, arrests with very very flimsy cause, you know, things that start to look more like you know, Putin type systems, even if they're on small scale. It's troubling. And I think it's rightly troubling to a lot of Americans who are not accustomed to seeing that as something that can be a feature of a political system.
yeah. I mean, there is that, but and yeah, even I was quite oversimplifying with yeah,
Yeah.
but still, it's something to think about the efficacy of liberal institutions to stabilize them. So, I mean,
Mm.
another good example of this is, in my opinion, France.
Mm-hmm.
France, for years, like even after the revolution, for many years, was rather unstable. There was a lot of violence,
Yeah.
uh, move towards cultural hegemony. France was not as culturally homogeneous
Uh huh.
as we think.
Right.
France had, even the French language was different in, say, it had the Normandy accent, the Occitan, the Aquitaine. They were, and then we saw a homogenization into French just being Parisian French, rather, and the other, dialects of French being turned into Crowled French. And
Yeah. No, I think even in our the way we think about France now, right? A lot of the cultural assumptions and biases and stereotypes that the rest of the world has about France are effectively cultural stereotypes and biases about Paris and Parisians, right? And France is still a very diverse and non-homogenous country, and certainly was, you know, at pretty much every point in its history. Um, but again, so too America, even motlier, even more diverse, even you know, many many more traditions coming together. And I think, you know, maybe because homogeneity was not ever in the cards, if you know, for our founding fathers, you know, maybe because that was never a presumption that we could make as Americans, it inclined itself to these institutions that were more pluralistic and more able to kind of take on board a broader uh, you know, view of experiences. You know, I think the most serious attempt to build an American ethno state is probably what we're witnessing right now from this administration, right? Like even really horrible American administrations in the past never seemed to think that there was some, you know, such a thing as an ethnic American. That term would have any meaning to anybody. And I know that the term that is in vogue on the right is heritage American. But I think,
Yeah.
like that is, and there have been nativist movements and xenophobic movements and anti-immigrant movements in America's past. Those have tended to focus on a category of immigrants, my ancestors, Southern European immigrants, or against Chinese immigrants, or Irish immigrants, or Catholic immigrants broadly. And so we've had this history of vilifying the other, but there's never been so explicit an attempt to say that there is like an American race of people that we are members of and other people are not. As there is now. That seems to me such an un-American thing. And I think that's part of the reason we've been so stable for so long, is that feels like such an un-American thing, to contend that there even is like a single ethnic us.
Yeah.
I have an important decision here, what to take while one is getting one's ass kicked at a war. Um, Ooh, extra defense platform cap. Sure, let's do it. Mm. But yeah, so I mean, I feel like on these things we always get deep and heavy, which is fine. I'm happy to go deep and heavy, but I'm also always happy to keep things light, and that's where on the top of my mind with this is there's almost this like very dark comedy that's happening in America right now, where
Mhm.
we're having UFC matches for the president's birthday. The reflecting pool has turned green. We're watching this sort of farce where the president, put his name up on the Kennedy Center in D.C. And has now been told by courts that it was unlawful for him to do so, because of course it was. And it ordered to take it down, and they've allegedly taken it down, but they've put up a curtain so that nobody can see that they've taken it down. And there is this very I mean, obviously it would not be very original to compare it to Idiocracy, the great Mike Judge movie, but there is
Yeah.
this comedic farcical backdrop to all of this horrible stuff that we often find ourselves talking about. I think that's worth noting.
Yeah. I mean, the entire very, I don't know, I just don't sometimes understand
One of our spaceports is under attack.
how
Well, I think you're touching on something that I kind of wanted to ask you, which is, and I think you're answering it instinctively, but just does this seem as strange as somebody who's both spent time in America and plenty of time abroad? Does this seem does this look as weird abroad as I think it ought to look to any sane person anywhere else looking at America saying, "What in the hell is happening?" Or is it our privilege to have had a very stable system where this seems very, very weird to us, but maybe is like, oh yeah, lunatics get power and then they do crazy stuff like this. This is par for the course.
We have mastered a new technology.
I do also feel like the internet has worried a lot of brains, because
Mm-hmm.
I I'm right now talking to an Israeli guy who's trying to convince me that somehow, this woman that has been on an NYP tabloid, like right-wing extremism doesn't exist in the UN, and January 6th had 176 or something FBI officers, and like right-wing extremism is
Mm-hmm.
complete nonsense. You cannot debate with these guys, and like apparently he claims he's Israeli, but I checked his accounts. Turns out he lives in fucking Minnesota, which is crazy. But
Hostile Xeno fleet detected.
They still have you there?
you know what? At this point, I
Yeah.
am not even gonna. At this point, I don't even debate with these. I'm like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, sure. Because I'm tired. Like, I know debate is a good instrument to be used against people who are rational, who are intelligent. People who just want to feel superior for their political beliefs are not.
Right. Well, and so
And
much of
all they
online
want to
debate
do,
is so performative.
and this is one of the reasons I'm like unplugging of the internet, because I realized a lot of the online debate culture is what I would like to call as intellectual masturbating,
Hmm.
where
One of our
you're
spaceports is
not
under attack. We have mastered a
actually
new
doing
technology.
things. You're not actually like
One of our spaceports has been lost.
you're not actually bringing, like, there's no purpose to the debate other than, you know, proving your superiority over your
Hmm.
ideological opponent. There's no
Our fleet
ability,
has
like,
collapsed.
the Socratic ideal of debate, where you talk about something, they talk about something, you find the contradictions in their argument, they find the contradictions in your argument. And the thesis, antitheses should lead to a synthesis. New ideas must come out of it,
Hmm.
right? I know, like, when we look at Hegel's methods of deducing the truth, I know I'm going to Hegelian philosophy because that's kind of like one of my pet peeves. But Hegel termed the dialectic as negative reasoning. Negative, not in the sense of, positive and negative as we see it, but he saw that dialectic as just one part of the way you can, infer information from the world. And the Hegelian dialectic is, just one of,
Hmm.
like, the actual word he uses is of heaven, which is called which is like, the rough translation is sublation or overcoming, as he called it. And he it is not complete without speculative or positively rational thinking, which is, as he wrote, it is tempting to think of these logical operations as, distinctively Hegelian, but they can be found almost everywhere. You could find, and in the discussions of a lot of intellectuals like, Gilbert Ryle, you find that speculative or positively rational is actually incomplete itself without a dialectical, or negatively rational, which itself is incomplete without the abstract or the intellectual. So, in the end, the correct thinking, according to Hegel, came from the Verstandig, the negative Vertungsnik, and the positive Vertungsnik.
One of our
I'm
stations is
fucking up
under
the German
attack.
a lot, but basically it comes to the intellectual or the
Hmm.
abstract, the dialectical, and the speculative. And if these three
One of our
are there,
spaceports is under
you have
attack.
proper thinking.
One of our spaceports
And
has been lost.
to subulate in a dialectic, you need to have three main senses:
Hostile
to
Xeno
raise,
fleet
to
engaged.
lift, to,
We have mastered
put
a new
forward
technology.
your argument, and then to annul, abolish, destroy, cancel, and suspend, to, you know, reject an argument by looking at it from a speculative lens, and to keep safe and preserve, to not only raise certain points but make sure that you can keep them. Idealism then becomes a doctrine that finite entities, it turns them into ideal. They depend not on themselves for their existence, but on some larger self sustaining entity that is the whole that underlies or embraces them. Okay, from all that rant, what I'm gonna like,
We
what
got
I want to
we
tell
got
you
very
is that there's
Hegelian there.
just exactly. I know Hegelianism is something most liberals do not study because most liberals rely on more so Kantian and neo-Kantian philosophy. Even John Rawls
Mm-hmm.
did not rely on Hegel. He
Mm-hmm.
relied on a lot of Kantian arguments and a lot of ancient Greek philosophy, Plato, and
Xeno invaders are defiling
Love the
one of our
Greeks.
planets.
love the Greeks. Hegel loved the Greeks. He
Yeah.
loved Plato so much he wrote his entire philosophy based on a lot of Platonic stuff. But as I said, thinking in the end is something that comes from
Hostile Xeno fleet
proper
detected.
rational thought and not just debate. And what we see with this internet culture of debate is that in the end, we do not see whether the person is right or wrong. It's impossible to ascertain whether they're right or wrong at the moment of the debate. They can just say something, and you
Mm-hmm.
don't even know if that's right or wrong. How could you?
Right.
Because you're practically taking them for their word. Like, when Trump says that, they're eating the dogs and the cats, how do you know they're eating the dogs and the cats? You have to think, you have to look at the evidence and, come to a conclusion. But that's the antithetical of modern right wing thought.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think, the entire paradigm falls apart. And that's why the right wing is so adamant on taking over, CNN, CBS, X. They call it, I'll call it Twitter forever until I die. And, Instagram, Facebook. Uh, they're keen on taking on these platforms and push this very aggressive
Mm-hmm.
algorithmic model because it prevents the one thing they don't want you to do, and that is to think. Because if you think, if you have intellect, you'll be able to see how, in a way, hollow their entire paradigm is, how hollow their thinking is, how inconstruably self-destructive a lot of it is, because all they focus on is short-term benefit. Trump wants money. Vance wants money. They all want money and power. They want to be the elites of this new world. And as this is one of the reasons why I am like not a proper libertarian, because I feel like
We have
where
mastered
the
the ability
libertarian
of
lacks is,
Mm-hmm.
ensuring that the libertarian order they propose can be, held up. That's why we do need regulation. We need regulation to ensure that power in the
we have
end
mastered the new
remains
technology.
within the people who constitute the liberal democracy. And and power goes beyond the power of voting, because if we look at the paradigms inside a liberal democracy, especially American form of democracy, it's not as simple as voting, It's all gerrymander. You have to look into gerrymandering, you have to look into,
Yeah.
a lot of lobbying. And I am one of the very few people. Well, a lot of my libertarian friends disagree with me on this heavily. In fact, a lot of people in this server will disagree with me heavily. But I do think, personally, that lobbying should not be allowed. It should be made illegal in any shape or form, because it has done nothing of benefit, but it has now led us to this moment where our very democracy, where our very way of life is in
Mm-hmm.
danger, only because one side was able to lobby their interests and ensure better life for the citizens of this country is not possible. Now, I'm not a person who's for like completely for state-controlled healthcare. We've already seen the failures of the NHS in UK and also similarly failing systems in Italy. I do feel like that the economy, like healthcare in general, should be a private enterprise, but I also do feel like that nobody needs to worry if they get sick that, oh, I have to pay this much as a doctor. That is bad. I feel the common man deserves at least a basic standard of living. A common person deserves equal opportunities. They deserve good healthcare. They deserve good education. We may disagree on how we're gonna put those outcomes there, but as long as we agree that the life of the citizen should be improved, there should never be an issue in, you know, a liberal democracy.
Hmm.
Because why liberal democracy? A lot of people ask me, why do we need all this arbitration, all this regulation, all of this? And I say we need it because it guarantees prosperity. It guarantees a better standard of living. You look at the UK, before the austerity craze, they had a very good standard of living. You look at Scandinavia, even right now, as there are economic pressures, as there's rising inequality, they still have a standard of living that is very comparable to the United States while not being as, economies as big as the United States. You look at Switzerland, their standard of living is immaculate, and it's a mix of both, government provided facilities and also private facilities. And I do think that in the end, it's not as simple as this, but I do think a lot of things need to happen to turn United States back on its feet, to, turn it back from, being this weird place where there's, a lot of wealth, but the people are in dire straits.
Hmm.
We do not, we need to, turn, because this has become the image of the United States, that we have the money for war, but we don't have the money to feed our own people. And that's bad because this then sends the message to,
Construction.
people in China, people in Russia, that their system, their autocracy is in that is not in any the liberal democracy is in no way superior to the autocracy they're already under.
In,
It
in in a
sends a
lot of
message.
ways, in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
what you're talking about is not unlike the Cold War challenge the United States faced with having to prove to itself and to the world that it was a system that was distinct and fundamentally better than the Soviet system. And that seems almost obvious in hindsight, but was certainly less obvious in the 1950s, 1960s.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because we are in a modern Cold War. Who's our opponent?
Yeah.
Our opponent is countries like authoritarianism, countries
Hmm.
like Russia, like China, like the European far right, people like Orban. These are our ideological enemies in this new Cold War. And we need to strike them where it hurts the most. We need to convince ourselves and convince our people and convince their people that
Council
this
agenda.
way of life, how long it has been since we've had a single defection from Russia that isn't a captured prisoner of war?
Hmm.
How long it has been? Ukraine has a lot of prisoners of war. They have some defectors, but they
Yeah.
don't have but the United States doesn't. Even when during the Cold War, people were literally risking their lives to escape the Soviets and come to the United States because they knew
Hmm.
that the United States guaranteed a better life, prosperity, and true freedom. This is the image we need to project of the United States. And to do that, we need to get rid of the Republicans, the current like evangelical MAGA, the current. We need to get rid of them. We need to destroy their paradigm, not through violence, but through how liberal democracies prove something is right or wrong, through simple institution building, through
Mm-hmm.
making institutions that incentivize progress, that incentivize prosperity, and disincentivize the ways of thinking that breed such ideologies, that breed such ideas. I know it's not going to be as easy as I'm saying. It's easy to say than to do. But we first need to recognize what we need to do before we do something. I do feel like a lot of the Democrat leadership, they try to connect to the working class, the common person, but they do not understand how the common person thinks, or how the common person, like, what they really want or what they need. And not it's not their fault, I will say, because paradigms in the modern world, the zeitgeist is so fluid. Like, yesterday 9 plus 10 21 was funny, before that 69 was funny, and within a few months 6 7 is the funny number, and now some people are saying 21 is a funny number. I mean, be- because paradigms have become so volatile, so fluid, it's not easy to really think about these things. It's not easy to really formulate long-term plans
Mm-hmm.
to capture the common spirit. It's difficult, but I don't think it's impossible. I think it can be done. We just need to foster a new culture, a better culture than what the Republicans are promising their people. The Republicans promise strength, but in reality, you show the people what they're giving you is weakness. You just signed an instrument of surrender to Iran.
A new technology.
Do you know how many feathers this will ruffle within the rural conservatives, who have always
Oh
seen
yeah.
America as this invincible, who do not even believe that they lost the Vietnam War?
Construction
Tell them that this is the first time in decades America was forced on its knees by a foreign power and forced to give $300 billion to them.
No,
It
I mean
will absolutely.
I think what you're seeing with the lack of sort of what most people perceive of as the lack of leadership from the Democratic Party is sort of exactly that, because there is no standard bearer, and there's likely not going to be a standard bearer identified with the Democratic Party until after the midterm elections, when there's this jostling of presidential hopefuls that may lead
Yeah.
to some frontrunners emerging. I think that until that point happens, like, there is no way for the Democratic Party to project a single strong unified message into the national conversation. There are talking heads that can kind of coordinate and get on some broad messaging platforms, and that's fine. And that's effective at making people see how terrible what the administration is doing is. And that's why the administration's numbers are in the toilet. But the Democratic Party's numbers are right down there with them. I think largely because there hasn't been that chance for a standard bearer to emerge. And really importantly and oddly, there really wasn't that chance in a meaningful way in 2024 either. Right, because
Yeah.
they trotted Joe Biden out and tried to do the, like, weekend at Bernie's routine, where, like, there's nobody there behind the eyes, but let's prop him up and hold him up and pretend he's still a living human being. That
And
was so
Bernie is
overcommitted
old.
to that the that I think, that sort of late entry of Kamala Harris. She didn't really have her own campaign team. It was just the Biden campaign still running on momentum is not even the right word, because they had none, but just still running on fumes. There wasn't this sense through which the Democratic Party could find its voice, but then could project its voice in a way that meant anything. So really, like, the last time the Democratic Party was acting on the national stage with any sort of cohesive message, whatever you might think about it, was the 2020 Biden campaign. And And even that sort of filtered through this weird COVID circumstance and all of that shut it down. So like it's been a decade since you can remember an effective Democratic Party. And that's really,
Yeah,
I think, hurting. Now there will be one. There will be one within the next year, right? And
yeah,
I think that's something that we haven't had to see. Like certainly 2016, right? The Clinton campaign was acting with agency, was projecting a vision, was representing a way of thinking, had a messenger who was out messaging, and it lost to Trump in 2016, who was a Republican Party that had all those things. But since then, we really haven't had that dynamic back. I think the Trump administration would
yeah,
love if we never got that dynamic back, but I think that's foolish. Like, we're going to have a Democratic Party that's acting like a political party with a standard bearer, doing effective things, and
yeah,
that effectiveness problem goes away, I think, more or less overnight. And then the question just becomes, what is the message? Who is the messenger? How is it pushing back against what people already deeply dislike in this administration? What is the,
yeah.
yeah.
Like if you look at the history of the Democratic Party has been successful when there are leaders who
Hmm.
can actually, carry a message. Like, remember FDR, hugely successful president, highly politically savvy, extremely good at getting the message through. We're gonna end the depression. We're gonna, revitalize America. We're gonna make a system. And like, he had a message. He had policy and he had charisma that got him really far in American
Hmm.
politics to the point of even ignoring the the two terms rule, right?
Well, the reason you have the two
And
terms rule
after
is,
that,
yeah, as people said, let's maybe
yeah,
codify this thing that we had just really liked that people were doing. Yeah.
yeah. I remember that, like, we're playing Stellaris right now. There's this Japanese novel by the name of Legend of the Galactic Heroes.
Okay.
One of the reasons the Galactic Federation turned into the Galactic Empire was because they did have a rule where no one can hold the position of prime minister and president at the same time, but it wasn't codified into law.
Uh huh.
So the first emperor, Rudolf von Goldenbaum, was just able to skirt that. He was like, I'll hold a referendum. You want me to be the president or prime minister? Okay, now I'm the president or prime minister. Now fuck the Galactic Federation. It's the Galactic Empire now. And then he went on to a genocidal rampage campaign that you know
As you do.
killed
Yeah.
as empires do. And his empire, however, unlike the Star Wars empire, actually lasted for around 350 years. No,
But
not even 300. Yeah, 350 years.
I do think science fiction is a wonderful lens to understand and see and process the present. That's why I've always been a huge science fiction fan. Is it's not really escapism, right? It is this constant dialogue with where
Yeah.
you are right now as a
And
society and what that means.
one of the reasons I love Japanese science fiction is they always do that. Like whatever, like behemoth of Japanese science fiction you
Hmm.
want to pick up, like say Mobile Suit Gundam, hugely popular in Japan. Basically, Japan's Star Trek. It touched on a lot of issues in Japanese society, in like of corruption, militarism, and it really made the Japanese people think, which is one of the reasons it
We have
was very
massively
popular.
taken over.
Hmm.
And bizarrely, despite being an anime for kids, a lot of people get offended when people call anime cartoons when in actuality they're just cartoons from Japan. But you know, it it resonated more with adults. Like the
Hmm.
creator of that anime literally once said that the only reason I was able to push through to finish this was because of all the letters I got from mothers who were housewives who watched that show, who were intrigued by it, and who sent short stories, fan fictions, and basically said that we love your show, and our children may not like it, but we love to watch it and we wanted to keep going. Which is crazy.
Yeah, but I mean,
And
but that's not that crazy, right? I mean, like that is the power that science fiction has. I think all fiction, to some extent, is in that same dialogue, but science fiction particularly feels like it is so rooted in the present in a way that's just very real and very impactful. And
yeah,
yeah, I mean, like that's always been sort of a hallmark of it.
Alma. Like, even if you look at Star Trek itself,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
would you have imagined a multiracial cast in those times? And not even Star Trek. Let's go even further back. The Twilight Zone.
Mm-hmm. The Twilight Zone's
It
fantastic,
dealt with such.
in fact, Project Liberal social media occasionally will put out some quotes and stuff from the Twilight Zone because it's so relevant. Like it is just directly addressing a lot of the relevant information at the time and the circumstance at the time, and grappling with the legacy of World War II, grappling with the sort of the nature of evil. It, super relevant, very present and pressing sort of
Yeah,
themes. Yeah.
exactly. And
And
then, you look at Doctor Who,
hmm
which also dealt with similar themes in Britain.
well, and I'll say, like you mentioned, original Star Trek and racial integration. It is. My daughter and I are right now watching through the original series. It's a second rewatch for her and a millionth time rewatch for me. But
Yeah.
the funny thing there is, you talk about an integrated cast and that being super ahead of its time, and you get to season 2 and Walter Koenig joins the cast, and so it's like, well, you have a Russian serving next to Americans in the heart of the Cold War. You have all of this other,
Yeah.
this message of a united planet, a united Earth that's left racism in the past, that's left bigotry in the past, that's left all this stuff behind it. And yet, like, it's very rooted in 1960s attitudes about women. It's very rooted, like it is still very much of its time as it's commenting on its time. And so it is a
Yeah.
historical time capsule. This thing that's still taking place in our distant future is very much about this time in our increasingly distant past, in
Exactly.
very interesting ways.
And it's not even in the United States. Even if you look at Soviet science fiction,
Mm-hmm.
they were doing the similar things. Of course, they were obviously under the watchful eye of the Soviet censor, but despite that, they tried their best to, address the issues of their society.
Right.
That was the Soviet society. You had, Andrei Tarkovsky making immaculate movies. I mean, he later on defected to the West and, lived the rest of his life in Italy. And you had a lot of amazing, basically, wherever you go all over the world, you will see that we had, like, right wingers in the modern day like to harken to the past. But if we look at the past, we see that the past wasn't looking at the past, it was looking
Mm-hmm.
at the future.
Right.
And it, in a way, is should be a reflection upon us, that why are we looking at the past? Why are we stuck in this demented nostalgia rather than exploring the future so full of possibility through the present?
Well, and I
Like,
think the future
there's,
right now has never been more, in my lifetime, never been more full of possibility. And so this rejection of the idea of what the future can be and what it says about the present is really like it's always regressive, but it seems doubly regressive now that we're on the cusp of like a world opening up with AI and technology and like all of the stuff that all the disruptive forces that has that are problematic that we need to deal with
yeah,
politically, but also all of the opportunity that opens up, all of the potential that opens up for human flourishing. And if we can carve out those spaces correctly, and if we can get there, in a way that's just and intelligent and wise, what that could be for us. There's just so much opportunity to look forward with those thoughts on our mind, that looking past back at the past and saying, oh, there's some moment where humanity was better, where the world was better. It seems odd to me. I do want to shout out Pierre Arnold, who's watching on YouTube. Thank you, for Pierre, in the comments. Says, as an ex-Democrat, the way the Clintons basically took over the party after funding Obama's presidency is where it all went downhill. At that point, the delegates stopped mattering. And there's a very good point in there about those institutions that exist inside parties. And I think that
Yeah.
is, we talk about these sort of ad hoc institutions that get developed in our systems. One important one, the political parties are not a part of the government in the United States. A lot of Americans sort of shamefully don't even realize that our parties are not a part of our government. They are these separate, private, independent entities. And they develop their own
Yeah.
means and methods of operating. And one of those things that's so important is how their internal processes affect the candidates that they put forward. And I do think that process is pretty deeply broken on both sides, but and in different ways. But certainly the Democratic Party has a lot of challenges. They're operating under rules that were basically written in 1972 after the 1968 Chicago debacle. But I think it's worth looking at those systems and
Yeah.
thinking, this is no longer serving the party. What can the party do about it?
You know what? Maybe George McGovern should have governed the country and won the election. It was his destiny, his birthright, and we stole it from it and gave it to fucking Nixon.
I mean, you want to talk about points of alternative history divergence, right? For fiction,
Yeah.
That's certainly one that is worth thinking about.
I would say that McGovern's chances were impossible, but I do think Herbert Humphrey could have won. He did have a
Yeah.
chance.
Yeah. No, McGovern
But
did not have much of a shot.
yeah, I mean, Watergate and all that came out later, but yeah, McGovern was doomed from the beginning.
Yeah, it's one of the two just unmitigated blowout elections in America's modern electoral history, right?
Yeah.
Probably on par only in our distant past with the near unanimous election of Washington to a first and second term. We've had no more unanimous elections since.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
yeah,
LBJ was able to pull off a pretty good run, but then, Reagan came and Reagan really. I still am like very surprised how Reagan was able to like not only get into power but stay in power, and how disastrous the Democratic Party's campaigns during those times were. And it also like speaks to a lot of the 80s zeitgeist. It's one of the things that I really need to deeply study, as
mhm.
in what kept Reagan in power. Because if you really look at Reagan on foreign policy, dude was a disaster. The Iran Contra affair,
Mhm.
and like that alone should have dumped his presidency, but it didn't. He was sort of like Trump in the sense that no amount of scandal could hide away a lot of his failures. And he did have successes, but a lot of those successes were not due to him, but due to Bush. George H.W. Bush, in terms of at least foreign policy, was a very competent president.
Mhm.
He was not a bad president at all when it came into the realm. But if you look at Reagan, he wasn't very competent at foreign policy. But Bush failed in the domestic sector. He failed at, stable the economy, which is one of the reasons Clinton was able to later come up. And I do feel like if Al Gore would have won 2000, the modern world would be absolutely unrecognizable.
Probably, yeah, probably. I do
Another
think that,
alternate history
yeah,
scenario.
another alternate history is like what happens if there are 500, if 500 people in Miami-Dade County vote the other way.
Yeah, I think my internet died. Just a second, let me return.
That's another inflection point worth considering. But no, I mean it's almost impossible, I think, for folks who have come up through American politics in this era of highly contentious, very close presidential elections to wrap our heads around an election like the 1984 election that is just,
Yeah,
every state except Minnesota goes to Ronald Reagan. Huge electoral
that was
college
crazy.
margins, and just a country. Like I said, it's not a country unanimously, right? Like Reagan had plenty of detractors. There were plenty of Democrats campaigning, very hard for Mondale, who really wanted to pull it out. But the effect of our system aggregating that into a very nearly unanimous electoral college outcome, which just means an overwhelming amount of public and popular support. It is difficult. Like, for me, I was very, very, very young at the time, but like that is a thing that occurred in my lifetime. And it's very hard for me to
Yeah,
wrap my head around what a politics would even look like in America that yields those kind of outcomes.
yeah.
And yet
It's
and yet we may experience it again. Like, we don't know what the fallout from this Trump era could look like. I mean, if there is justice in the universe, there should be a
hmm,
reckoning where the Republican Party becomes virtually unelectable outside of these rural state enclaves for a generation, right? I mean, like the party
yeah,
that allowed this to happen under their banner deserves to be consigned to a generation of obscurity. And whether that will actually happen, I don't know, but it's within a possibility space that I think we can consider. And I could imagine maybe a 2032 election where the Republican Party is just so shattered that there isn't really an effort to mount a meaningful national election campaign, and you could see some really lopsided electoral college result. But it's really, like, it sounds like science fiction to talk about, and there's just no way to divorce it from the lived experience of the
yeah.
past 20 years of American politics.
The past 20 of years of American politics have been how the Republican Party evolved from a center right to a basically far right party is something that I think
Hmm.
will be and will be needed to be studied
We have
by
mastered
future
the new
generations,
technology.
because it's not like the Republican Party has always been like this. The governor of Massachusetts, Charles Baker, if you know of him, he uh, I looked at his policy, and if he literally resigned from the Republican Party because he was tired of Trump. But and it's crazy that in a deep blue state as Massachusetts, there was a Republican governor for so long. That was because
Hmm.
Baker was, not only was he like a good man, like he also was like he was able to capture the the democratic imagination of a good moderate leader
Right.
who didn't go too far, and who basically was very agreeable on social issues and even economic issues, and ensure good governance.
Hmm.
And that's how he was able to stay in power, which is, to me, what your ideal Republican should be like. If the Republican Party wants to go away, they should go the way of Charles Baker to survive, because he, in my opinion, was one of the best governors Massachusetts had in history. And I do think he deserves, like, if he somehow, he wouldn't, because I know he's very disillusioned with Republican politics in general. But if he ever like wants to, come back to the Republican Party and reform it into his vision, I think he can pull it off. He was hugely popular in Massachusetts and outside back in his time. I mean, he's not even that old yet. He's like in his 60s right now, and or maybe late 50s. I'll have to check that. But you know, relatively young person,
We have mastered the
very
new
liberal,
technology.
very moderate, very able to, go through the challenges, and basically he could be a really good leader for the Republican Party if they ever go out of their MAGA phase
Yeah,
and
I just don't
return
think
back to the
I don't think there's a party there for that. I think is the weak point to that analysis. I think there's a few things, right, that have changed in that time where we've seen this Republican Party, and I like your framing of it, radicalize from a center right party to a far right party, and that transformation. Yes, we saw the loss of people who, had the ability to have localized characteristics to, you're in Massachusetts, so you govern in a more liberal way than you would if you're, the Republican governor of Mississippi or something. Uh,
Yeah.
but then there's also this effect of, that localism was allowable in a way that I think it no longer is in either party, right? The politics are much more national politics that trickle down at a local level. So like, if my Republican, if there's a Republican trying to run for, city council in in Seattle, the few Republicans that are part of that constituency will disavow that person unless they hold the radical right-wing MAGA line, right? We saw in the Republican primaries what happens to non-MAGA Republicans, right? It's even Republicans have that demand, even in places where locally it makes no sense to maintain that demand. So you have that local, the sort of death of local politics. You have this national trend to a much more right-wing politics, much more alt-right, much more radical far-right politics in the party broadly, which pulls it further away from the political center in America, pulls it further away from liberal constituencies in liberal states and districts. And then you also have this, just, I think, you have a national climate that's just so difficult, right? You've got this social media landscape that imposes all of these pressures on campaigns that they never had to face before. You've got this very closely contested, not just very closely contested presidential elections like we were talking about, but a very closely contested House and Senate most of the time. So you've got all of the federal government up for grabs in many elections, back after back after back, and there's just this radicalizing effect that has on a process. There's a real tangible way in which politics were better when it wasn't close, and when there were back rooms, and it was not as closely tied to popular sentiment. I mean, there is something to be said about the old backroom machine politics that did not perpetuate those radicalizing pressures. And it's not long ago, right? Like another governor of Massachusetts, Republican governor of Massachusetts, Mitt Romney, was the Republican nominee in 2012, right? So 14 years ago, those forces were not as strong as where they are now.
Romney, in my opinion, is even to this day a good guy. He's not radical. He's not bad. He's just how you would expect a center-right Republican to be. And, nobody should have a problem with it. Even I don't have. And I feel that the MAGA wave, whenever it dies down, because it will eventually die down.
Yeah.
As the conditions in the United States worsen and worsen, especially due to the debt backing up. Because one thing that people do not talk about enough is just how much the national debt is affecting the American economy and its ability to really go around. And we have seen with the example of other countries that going the way of austerity is not the way either. Because you look at the UK, they went with austerity. Their living standards collapsed.
Yeah.
And with no proper reduction in their debt.
Well, and notably, like, with a radicalization in their politics, that we're talking about American politics being disturbing, I'm very worried about the United Kingdom and the direction of their political lurch to the right. Largely because it seems theirs is in this sort of nascent stage where it's just beginning, as opposed to ours, where like we seem to have experienced our wave of right-wing politics and now we're dealing with it. But the UK, it doesn't seem like the wave has broken yet,
Yeah,
and so
and
that's
then
worrying.
there comes the question of the radicals. Like, would
Mhm.
you even under Trump rule expect anything to happen in the United States at the scale it happened in Northern Ireland
Yeah, I was just gonna say
recently?
the and I'm gonna call it what it is. The pogrom in Northern Ireland, that we saw occur, is horrifying and wild. And in fact, I think the fact that that's not happening in America is why the Trump administration, Stephen Miller and people like that are so eager to push, ICE to cause conflict and try to increase violence on the streets in the United States. They have to use these sort of government agents. They have to pull on these government levels because they don't have this large popular movement of people who they can turn out, private citizens who they can turn out into the streets to do political violence. Seeing that in Northern Ireland has been shocking, has been absolutely shocking.
Yeah, and it's also bleeding into Ireland proper.
Yeah.
Construction
Like,
complete.
they have, and the current government of Ireland is, Sinn Féin is in power right now. Sinn Féin Fianna Fáil. I forgot which one was the right wing one. Sinn Féin.
I
I don't
haven't.
know
I
Irish.
will.
I'm
I
sorry.
will. I will admit, perhaps to my shame, but I will admit that I have not followed Irish politics closely, like probably since the end of the Troubles. So I may be a
It's
bit.
okay. Okay, Sinn Féin is a left wing one, so Fianna Fáil is in power right now,
Uh huh.
and while they are very moderate, they're not very radical in their right wing beliefs. They're very like center right, very centrist, not very left wing. But they're like the center right pro European movement that has been taking a lot of traction because many people are very frustrated by the left wing parties in you know
We have mastered a new technology.
Europe, but they also don't want to turn to the radicalism of, say, Alternative for Deutschland,
Right.
or the radical right party, because your average European is more politically literate in general than your average American. This is a very hard fact, a very hard pill to swallow. But as someone who knows people there, who has been there, this is also a fact.
I find it a very
They
easy pill
are,
to swallow, having spent 20 years engaging in one form or another with the average American voter. I find it very easy to believe that Europe is more politically literate than your average American.
yeah, and they recognize who they truly are. Like, do you know where the true support for far right politics in Europe rests? It rests in former Soviet countries,
Mm-hmm.
countries that were formerly under the Soviet bloc. And this is very intentional because they begin to associate even a little bit of liberal thinking with left wing thinking. And for
Right.
them, the left wing is the Soviets, which in the end just fuels this paradigm where, you know, you sort of roll back
Construction
into that
complete.
Soviet form of thinking
Mm-hmm.
where it's all paranoia, authoritarianism, but rather than, it's just a different coat of paint, but it's the same
Our
paradigm.
future is our birthright. We are
Yeah, no,
born
And
I think
I,
into
I think
this
that
life.
authoritarian conditioning definitely. You look at like the political map of Germany and like all sorts of demographic maps in Germany, and you see that as well. And
yeah, exactly.
the observation I'll make is that there's a version of that that is directly applicable to American politics as well, and that is with the American South. You look at a lot of political and demographic information just even like economic information, educational outcomes, all kinds of other demography. And you get the map of the Confederacy coming back at you through the US map, the same way you get the map of East Germany reemerging in Germany across all of those similar metrics. And, you have this, is like you have this separate country within a country that has all of this different cultural conditioning, all of the, like you said, sort of like conditioning to accept more authoritarian outcomes, and that manifests even through our politics, for sure.
Yeah, it also lends itself to an idea that even after the fall of authoritarianism, it isn't over. It has only just begun. You
Yeah.
need to establish liberal institutions. You need to establish liberal paradigms of thinking. And that's how you're going to ensure a prosperous, united, liberal world. Because, you know, from where I look at it, the existential threats upon humanity right now, climate change, we have, you know, we need to handle AI, we need to handle poverty, we need to handle a lot of issues. And for that, I do think we do need a unified and united Earth
Mm-hmm.
against all of these issues. And we also need to look towards space travel. We need to at least, because we faster than light travel may not be physically possible, but at least we can mine the asteroids. We can get to a place where we can, because resources on Earth are eventually gonna run out. We need alternatives. We need nuclear fusion. We need to shift away from fossil fuels. We need to find alternatives to plastics, to a lot of things. And I don't think a lot of them are gonna be found on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah,
moon, however.
as a
Look at
as
the
a
moon.
as somebody who is both a globalist and a futurist, I am happy to indulge this train of thought because I do think, the future of humanity at some point is a politically unified Earth. We've taken small steps through the United Nations and other institutions to do that. We've also taken small steps, much bigger steps through like the European Union to unify significant geographic chunks of the world.
Exactly.
But I think, and I want to acknowledge in our YouTube chat, Tor Christopherson points out from our earlier conversation that social media is absolutely a factor in the loss of localization in politics, and offered the example of Beto O'Rourke in Texas running while proudly declaring, "Yes, we're coming for your AR-15," and that as long as you have your local constituency who actually elects you and your social media constituency that has to pull you towards the sort of national party line, you're going to have those effects. But if we can't solve those problems that we were talking about in the United States with the South, or in Germany with the former East Germany, if we can't figure out how to politically integrate and liberalize these places with histories of authoritarianism within our own national polities as they exist now, I can only imagine the challenge that it would be to integrate a Russia or a China into a sort of liberal united Earth, right? Like the arms of that political legacy are going to stretch forward in time so far, unless really deliberately thought about in terms of how to bring institutional change.
Yeah, we do need those institutions. Otherwise, our future looks more similar to Mobile Suit Gundam than, let's just say, something like Star Trek. Because authoritarianism as a political force has existed since millennia. It's not like, even in the days of feudalism, there were leaders who like
Let the battle
tended to put
commence.
a lot of authority upon themselves, and there were leaders who tended to, dispel that authority and keep it up with local feudal lords. There was not a formal, but even a sort of informal social contract that was there, especially in countries like, say, the England, and a lot of Eastern European countries like Poland, Hungary. They had, and Venice. the Italian states. They had these weird political structures that
Hmm.
were, while feudal in nature, did were more similar to, say, a distributed, like, it was more similar to a social informal social contract than like, the king does anything he wants. Because let's just say you are Tyler,
Mastered a
I
new
have
technology.
christened you the Lord of Aquitaine, but the king of France wants your land, but you are the Lord of Aquitaine. You have your own Levi, your own
Hmm.
military, your own serfs, and you have a lot of nobles that are ready to support you. What do? You go and overthrow the king. Exactly.
Our ships have been upgraded.
Yeah, I mean, we're touching on,
Special
the
product.
past weeks we've talked a bit about selectorate theory and stuff, and I think that, there has never in history been an absolute monarch in the sense that one man could unambiguously rule unto themselves with no support of any other stakeholders, right? And so there's always a system of
Exactly.
stakeholders behind any sort of system of power, and that sort of winning coalition, that coalition that's necessary to take and then retain power within a political system, the great advantage of liberal democracy, the great gift of liberalism to the world, among many other great gifts, is that the radical expansion of that selectorate within our political systems. So you need a huge number of people to support you to become president of the United States compared to the number of people
Exactly.
you need in order to be, a 17th century king of France.
Yeah. And even with Louis XIV's absolutism, which was it was a brutal time for France. It
Mm-hmm.
was like,
Absolutely.
and that in the end also laid the foundations for the French Revolution because it created
Mm-hmm.
this status quo. Because at the end of the rule of the Sun King, he had faced defeat in a lot of battles against England. And, his campaigns in, like, the Duke of Marlborough defeated one of his greatest generals at, I'm forgetting the name of the battle. It was somewhere in Germany. But basically, the myth
We have
of
mastered a
French
new
invincibility was
technology.
broken there. And then you look at later on, you know, wars in the
Our ships have
Americas
been
that
upgraded.
France was unable to gain a decisive victory in, wars in the Indies, India, West Indies, where they were very decisively defeated by the British despite having superior
Mm-hmm.
leaders. But the British simply were not only able to outproduce and outmaneuver, but out ally them. Like at the peak of French power in India, they controlled the king of Hyderabad, the they called it the Nizam of Hyderabad, the Karnataka coast. But and what the peak of British power in India was. Even at that time, when the French controlled a lot of land and had alliances with a lot of local rulers, the British still held Madras, the
Mm-hmm.
British held Bengal, the British held Bombay, the British still were there and they were out for blood. And when they finally struck during the Third and Fourth Carnatic Wars, it was over for France. They were then just relegated to a few cities like Pondicherry and Mahe, Ijama, small ports. And it was the British who come up at the end as like the big dogs. And any attempts at the French to put themselves in, like, with courting local rulers like Tipu Sultan, mercenaries, all that stuff, was in the end unable to do anything. The British were simply that powerful. And in the end, it was the failure of France to assert themselves on the world stage. Like, even in the American Revolution, where the British were for the first time defeated by colonial power, and that colony asserted itself as independent, it cost France pretty much an arm and a leg
Yeah.
to fund the revolutionaries. And the revolutionaries, when it came to paying that debt, straight up went, uh
Well, maybe not so straight up, nah, but yeah, certainly said we'll take our time.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? I
Yeah.
that led to the economic disaster that led to the events that would eventually spiral into the French Revolution.
Hmm.
And because history, I like to think of history as a destiny of humanity. Like where we are now definitely is dictated by our past. What
Sure.
happened in the past is dictated by what happened past that.
Hmm.
And so that's why I think we as liberals should study history. And this is one of the reasons I like to tell people to have an intellectual mind, to foster that sense of curiosity and thinking. Because knowing what weapon the Germans used in World War II isn't actual history. That's just you knowing an event. True history is when you not only know the events, but think about them, when you use those events to set up paradigms. History is to the social studies what math is to the sciences. Without history, you have no social studies. Just like how without math, you have no social sciences.
Well, and I think that's a powerful entreaty against sort of the pitfalls of, what's sometimes called Whig history. This idea that all of history is uh, just this story of the inevitability of coming to a sort of liberal democratic world order such as we have now, that it's all a process of coming to a place of a universal recognition of human dignity and civil rights and political
Mhm.
rights that we have now, and that history is sort of this necessary human story of how we reach our final form, which was always where the destination was going to be, whether there were bumps or pitfalls along the way. And it. I think we've lived in an era where it's very easy to fall into that mode of thinking.
Yeah.
And liberals have historically often fallen into that mode of thinking. And I'm much more
Yeah.
of a camp of sort of like fighting liberalism, that this is not at all a predestined thing, and that we should learn from history, as you say, and understand it, but also recognize that we're not living in a history that is written. It is up to us to write it, and we can write it in any number
Exactly.
of ways.
Like I do am of the Hegelian idea of it destining, like, we are going somewhere. It's just that I believe that somewhere could not be liberal democracy. In fact, if you look at time periods,
Hmm.
Karl Marx believed that somewhere was, communism, uh, stateless, moneyless, and, a society where everyone's material needs were met. And even for Karl Marx, that wasn't the end of history. And it was actually when we will begin to think of the end of history. Like, because here's the thing, right? When people study Karl Marx, they only study, Das Kapital and, the Communist Manifesto. They don't even look beyond that. When Karl Marx wrote a lot more, he wrote Die Grundreise and he wrote 1848 Economic and Political, you know, manuscripts. Those two words, in my opinion, are much stronger arguments that a socialist or a Marxist could make for their points than anything written in Das Kapital, because Marx does not begin with, the workers are oppressed. He begins with Hegel and he ends at his philosophy. Now, we know for his time that philosophy seemed almost inevitable, but now we know that he was wrong, that the way he looked at society as, class conflict and, capitalism being temporary isn't what it was. Turns out capitalism is here to stay.
Yeah.
It has been here to stay since a long time, and it has, even Marx agreed, led to a rise in the standard of living of, average humans. I do think the future of humanity, while still capitalist, will go into more in the realm of, a welfare state rather than, free market capitalism. This is mostly because of the economic pressures and like where things are going. And where like I still kind of sort of believe in this dialectical relationship between the social and the material. So there's that. And I do think that where we're going towards is a more liberal future. But, you know, the material conditions only open the condition of possibility of reaching there. You have to use your will, your free will, to work towards that future as well.
Yeah, well, and
It
yes,
all,
I definitely don't think you can just sit back and sort of like, inner tube the
yeah,
river of inevitable change. Like you can't just be carried by currents. You have to row. Now you can row with
yeah.
currents or against currents, and you're going to have varying success
Like,
rates.
do you know one of the reasons Vladimir Lenin was able to capture the socialist movement in Russia was precisely because many communists had pretty much thought that, communism is inevitable. So why
Hmm.
should we work towards communism? And then he came up with this theory of vanguardism that, maybe we should be proactive in our future and look how far it took communism as an ideology, which seemed to be, getting nowhere, suddenly took over state and build its own parallel civilization that rivaled the West for years. We know in hindsight that it wasn't as big or as strong as it was made out to be, but for a time it was a legitimate threat to the West and to the Western way of living. It had its followers, especially in the third world, who felt that the West had betrayed them, that all of their liberalism, capitalism, prosperity was for the white man and not for them. For them, it was unending toil, unending suffering under a system that slowly degraded them to a position where they were nothing more than creators of wealth for people who lived far, far away from themselves. And I think there is a very interesting argument to be made on, critiques of past liberalism, where how the liberal reaction to colonialism was not enough. Rather than building up, liberal institutions that would have ensured prosperity and giving them freedom, the states and even the liberals of the time decided to go the route of oppression, of colonial exploitation, that in the end led to them embracing a lot of socialist ideas and even fascist ideas, which, I do not look at political movements from what they say they are. I like to look at for what they do, and that's how I make my assertions on what someone was. Stalin may call himself a communist, but he was, in my eyes, and always will be, a fascist of the highest order. Because in essence, he was no different than Hitler, if you look at it. He, rather than the Jews, he did oppress Jews as well, by the way.
Yeah.
For one, he was very distrustful of his chief propagandist. He was also a Jew, Sergei, I think his name was Sergei Einsberg. I'm forgetting his name. I'm so sad. But yeah, uh, he was, about the doctor's plot and
Hmm.
the pogroms. And he was also very much against other minority like Ukrainians. We saw the Holodomor and, oppression of Central Asians, and also, the slow Russification of Siberians, which was something that the Lenin promised would stop after the Imperials are out, because the Imperials did the same, but under Stalin, it was still carried out. In fact, here's a very fun thing about Lenin. He thought that Russia was not ready for socialism. He wanted to implement a more capitalistic society before he thought that Russia was ready to move towards communism, the new economic policy. And it did foster a society of some middle class people who could have, in the end, fostered a liberal tradition that would eventually lead to the slow erosion of liberalism, of communism, and the ushering of liberalism. But then Stalin happened.
Though I mean, there is absolutely like the widespread gutting of kulaks and landowning class and all of that under Lenin. Like Lenin is not the good guy in the story either. Just because
Yeah,
Stalin comes along,
he's not the
and
good guy,
yeah,
but he's like a lighter shade of black,
yeah,
as you would say.
yeah. He's
Because
a very deep charcoal gray.
yeah,
But no, it's
like it's
it is true. I mean, it's so many of these things that are the sort of authoritarian, and we maybe, I don't know if we're seeing a revival of any of these classical type of, communist or fascist authoritarian regimes in the world. Even though there are certainly a few communist ones still holding on. North Korea comes to mind. Its own sort of unique brand of thing.
yeah.
Um,
North Korea, despite its claims of being a communist country, is more akin to a semi-constitutional monarchy, not different from the Russian monarchy.
Yeah, well, and I think most of the authoritarian regimes that we are seeing now, as the real threat to the sort of liberal democratic world, like Putin's regime in Russia, are carving their own path. Like they're not these ideologically rooted, third way sort of. It's none of that sort of stuff. It is very much just about personal power. They're sort of like these kleptocratic states, sort of individual personality cult regimes. And I don't know, I mean, other than just referring to them as authoritarian, other than referring to them as illiberal, all of which they definitely are, I'm not particularly sure how to frame them other than, to simply say that this is, I think, the rising authoritarian threat that we face now, in contrast to those sort of 20th century more ideological, even if they didn't live up to their ideology, right? Like I suspect a communist would be very upset at me framing Stalin as an ideological authoritarian. But there was at least a pretense there that is different and distinct from what we kind of see now in the modern world.
Yeah, I do feel like even when we talk about communism and socialism, ever since like the 70s and 80s, they have softened up to democracy in bit, which in the end is the result of the United States surviving the, you know, Cold War
Yeah.
and proving itself to be more stable and more, you know, the superior. And I do think in the end that the new authoritarian wave does not conform to an ideology more so than it conforms to what is in essence a cult of personality towards a leader. The like to call them authoritarian is technically accurate because they are authoritarian
Mm-hmm.
and they are very like they rely on cults of personalities and they share a similar disdain for liberal institutions because liberal institutions put checks and balances that do not allow them to, you know, extract the wealth of the populace at such a level. Because if you look at, Vladimir Putin, he's filthy rich. His allies are filthy rich, while the average Russian lives in a state of what is essentially, you know, unless you're living in Moscow or St. Petersburg, you're practically soul crushingly poor and are either forced to work or forced to join the military and, sent in to die in heat waves in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean,
Or if you're in
I think
China,
authoritarian. My objection to authoritarian is not that it's inapt, just that it's doesn't feel very specific, right? I feel like we should have a word for the specific variety of thing that we're now experiencing.
I mean, there is a word for it in communist like literature. It's called Bonapartism. It doesn't really exist in liberal literature, but I study communist literature. I study fascist literature because Know your enemy, know yourself. You need not fear defeat in 1,000 battles. So they do have a word for this. They call it Bonapartism,
Hmm.
which I think is very apt. If you look at how Putin, you know, markets himself towards the world, where he's like, "Oh, I have black belts. I used to be in the KGB. I'm like
Right.
this super macho manly badass," which is very similar to how Napoleon showed himself as, a tactical strategic genius, a military man, a man of the people, a man who held the standard, the banner, and led for the charge into the enemies of the revolution. So I do think Bonapartism is a very apt word, and it's very like evocative as well of a certain kind of thinking. It's just that a lot of people still view Napoleon in a very positive lens. I don't.
Hmm.
I think Napoleon became the synthesis of what we will later see as fascism,
Yeah.
because it really brought in that very specific sort of cult of personality that we'll later
Hmm.
associate with fascist regimes. He also invented gas chambers, where he would literally put people, mostly African French, into ships filled with sulfur, and they would literally be choked to death on those ships. Nobody talks about a lot of Napoleon films. Everyone's like, "Oh, he was such a great general. Look at his magnificent battlefield victories. Oh, look at these maneuvers at Austerlitz. Look at these brilliant moves in Italy that won him the battle despite being outnumbered. Look how he sieged Vienna." But we forget to talk about the atrocities he committed. We do
Hmm.
not look at the like how he basically was a modern Caesar. I don't like the word Caesar. I call it Kaiser because that's technically the correct pronunciation. But you know, I prefer to be more understandable than be in my little bubble. But yeah,
I
he
was gonna
did
say
become
I doff
in
my
the
cap to
end.
your nerd Latin there, but I will admit I say Caesar, even though I know it's modern and incorrect. But yeah, no,
Yeah,
I think that's a very good point. I think we are seeing a lot of that reflected in these modern leaders, that that personality cult, the self-aggrandizement, the narratives of greatness. And you're. It sounds like you're a war gamer, like I am, both tabletop
yeah,
and in other ways. And it is like there is this tendency to fixate on a figure like Napoleon or a figure like Robert E. Lee, or to reduce some of these figures down to a set of battlefield tactics that you are able to admire, and to lose the personal, political, social implications that ride along with that as baggage. Like Napoleon, like I would not
yeah,
want to live in Napoleonic France. I mean, like that sounds like a
exactly.
nightmare. Yeah.
Like, as someone who's been into wargaming for a really long time, ever since I was a kid, I like my there exists this allure of the strong military leader.
Mm-hmm.
Like, or like, the fantasy of being a strong military leader. And I, in the end, would like to say to everyone that's watching it and who's into wargaming, because I know there are a lot of right-wing extremism in those spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to say that in the end, the allure of this strong military leader is very fake. Like, if it's not true, it's an illusion that is in the end a consequence of the fact that we, even to this day, to a large part, still stick to the great man theory when it comes to historiography. Because even if you look at Robert E. Lee, he did win a lot of impressive victories, but if you actually critically look at his victories, they were, proper strategic
We have
defeats
mastered a new technology.
than victories, because in the end, he could not save, because, the military paradigm
Yeah.
divides military operations. It could be tactical, operational, strategic, and then there's a whole study of how military like win wars, how wars, you know, happen, how victory is achieved, and even Napoleon alone would not have been a person who could have won the battles by himself. He had brilliant marshals under him.
Hmm.
He had Murat. He had just so many talented people working under him that he was able to win those victories. Did you think that Robert E. Lee would have been able to make those brilliant maneuvers without the organizational genius of James Longstreet? Or,
Yeah,
you
no,
know,
I mean,
because,
yeah, of course. But even if you're gonna, I think my point is more, even if you're going to allow all of a military organization, all of a chain of command to roll up under, the top of that order of battle, you still have all of these implications. I mean, you mentioned, I think, a very good point, which is that Lee's victories, certainly after 1862, served very little identifiable strategic purpose, as much as just like just hang on as long as possible, but to what end? And and then what? It's very it's very military strategy via underpants gnomes. Step one, beat the Union Army. Step two,
yeah,
question mark. Step three, profit. Um,
yeah,
and so yeah, I think that's fair. But there is this real tendency, and I've been into wargaming since I was super young, and I feel the same thing. Like there is this draw to where you want to idolize the figure, and I think you're absolutely right to say that that's a sort of fool's gold, and it's not a harmless one. I think there is tremendous harm that comes from accepting some of those narratives. Another example that comes to mind is Guderian, right? Who sort of
yeah, Heinz Guderian.
publishes Lost Victories after the Second World War, and gets to basically write his own propaganda narrative, wherein he made all the right decisions, and Hitler was a bad guy who undermined him, but the Wehrmacht really didn't do anything wrong, and it was really down to the political structures of the Third Reich that were all the real problems.
Yeah,
And just finds Western audiences willing to accept that wholesale, because like tanks are cool, and
the Red Scare.
backhand blow something something, and the Red Scare, the fact that his enemy was overwhelmingly the Soviets and not us. Yeah, I mean, I think those are all
Yeah,
that all feeds into it in ways, that I think were tempting for Western audiences to accept that narrative that just really should not have been accepted. And that's very easy to happen when you can abstract something like military strategy and divorce yourself from the sort of political ramifications of that. I think that's worth guarding against.
yeah, because and to actually guard yourself against it, you have to look at history beyond the combat, beyond the war. Also, nice, but
Sorry, you cut out there, but I'm going to take advantage of that to say hi, Nolan. Welcome.
Hi.
We've been going for a little while here, so I don't know how much longer we're going to go, but yeah, we've been talking.
You playing Stellaris?
I am. I'm playing. So this is the Star Trek New Horizons mod for Stellaris, and it's just been endless waves of Klingons crashing into our border, in what earlier I referred to as Space Bakhmut. It's just been brutal, but we've been chatting away, while getting
That's
a little Stellaris done.
How
How are
living
you
in my
this
lovely
evening?
shipping container. Doing great. I'm living in my lovely shipping container. It's a great life here.
All that square footage is yours, huh?
Exactly. I got great value on it. It's almost like they paid me to be here.
Almost like. So, we were chatting a bit. Well, I don't know. We went down some long rabbit holes, but we were chatting a bit about sort of the importance of kind of rejecting Whig history and the idea that historical outcomes are inevitable, and then dovetailed into how, as nerdy wargamers, the both of us, that there's this tendency to be abstract in considering just like pure military, genius, innovation, tactical acumen, and divorcing that from a variety of much more important kind of political and
Was a
social and
blackout.
historical implications.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
that you
like
blacked
there
out.
was a blackout, and I'm gonna be honest, blackouts have become more common since the last like couple of months, which is crazy because
It's monsoon season out there, ain't it?
yep, it's monsoon, but there's no rain right now. It's clear skies, and I live in a more posh area where it's like you're supposed to give me 24/7 electricity. I live in a posh area. So
The last time the U.S. experienced
Yeah, this
something
is
like
great.
that, California threw its governor out in the middle of a term. So, yeah.
yeah, here it's like standard practice.
Yeah.
Like this is a facet of life we just accept. But yeah, as I was saying, that the paradigm, like to really escape that paradigm of idealizing these military figures like Guderian,
Uh-huh.
you really need to think of history as something beyond battles and war. You
Right.
need to see history as just your past, and the past, like your present, does not only consist of conflict but also how they lived, the society, the culture, and even really mundane things like the food, the way food was prepared, the way we did mundane things. Which
Bureaucracy, taxes, courts, law enforcement.
exactly.
You can learn a lot about a society by the history of its tax and conscription system and censuses.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's such
Yeah.
an under like I don't know. A lot of people like to go, "Oh, I'm really into history." Oh, you're into history? Oh yeah, I'm big into military history. Oh, Rommel. Oh, I love Rommel, man. Have you heard of Rommel? It's like,
No, I mean, I do think that there's, and I'm a nerdy history guy too, not just a military history guy. There's a book behind me on like foreign labor practices in the Third Reich that is just like tables after tables. Yeah, it's just so I pick up stuff like that all the time because I do think it's relevant to look beyond like the tank battle that everyone wants to talk about, or the military genius, the thing,
Yeah.
Napoleon. Ooh, let's talk about Austerlitz and Jena, or let's talk about Waterloo and how it all went sideways, or the invasion of Russia. And it's like those are military decisions. Most of those conversations are tactical. You could argue the invasion of Russia was a huge strategic mistake, but many of them are like tactical brilliances. And yeah, there's so much more, and history, the value in history. I think you said it really really well earlier, that the value of history is not just in knowing things, but in thinking about them, and then taking that knowledge and learning from
We
it.
have mastered a new technology.
I think a really formative
Yeah.
experience for me was so my local library still has a microfilm of the newspaper going all the way back to like
Oh.
the early 1900s. And on top of that, because I live in Tallahassee, the State Archives of Florida are right across the street, and that's where they keep all of the like government records and paperwork that they're not allowed to destroy. So and a lot of that's just like literally open for you to take. Like I walked in there and I found like a book from 1830 just sitting on the bookshelf, and it was like the record of the territorial legislature of Florida. And I was like, shouldn't this be in like a sealed thing or something? They were like, what's that? And I'm like, it's a book from it's a record from 1830. But they got like old
You don't have-
PBS episodes.
I'd love to read that because I'm into that sort of thing, like studying really obscure, really unknown parts of history because it widens my horizons over, oh, this could have, this is how they did this is how they did that. And,
Yeah.
looking at it a bit, it's interesting. It's like,
It's just so cool to see,
Well-
like, for example, how your town kind of saw events like the Wall Street crash or World War II or Pearl Harbor and like kind of going into it and actually seeing it. The first newspaper I did was January 1st, 1921, and it was of a lynching of a black guy. But the problem is that the newspaper, which nowadays is a really progressive newspaper, was like cheering it on and saying, "This is how justice works in the South."
Yeah, I don't know that
that's
I thought it-
it's crazy.
in the 1920s, you're going to get a very different view of that newspaper than you're going to get in modern day.
It's called the Tallahassee Democrat, by the way, just so you know. That's the newspaper of record in Tallahassee.
I mean, let's be real. This average Southern Democrat, the Dixiecrat of those times, was
Was publishing articles cheering on lynchings is what they were doing. Yeah, that's exactly right.
exactly
Um,
because the Dixiecrats did not jump ship to the Republicans before, like the whole Southern strategy and all that, which is
Well,
another can of worms.
a lot of people forget that the party switch wasn't a clean thing either, because Faubus and George Wallace both supported the New Deal and were like extremely economically progressive. If you actually look into their domestic policy kind of practices, most of them were really big, building schools, keeping the roads, prosperity, but not for black people. No. But
that's just for the whites.
But I feel like that should be like a mandatory thing for schools and stuff like that. Just like find some, if your town has a microfiche and if they still have it and I end up becoming a teacher,
Microfiche.
and I would do, is I would say, go dig some stupid shit up from the library and tell me something I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be a teacher. I still, occasionally teach people if they're like, oh, if there's a kid outside, he's like, coming back from tuition or school, he's like having trouble with maths or something. I'm like, you know what, kid, give me a few bucks. I'm gonna teach you this.
Yeah.
And you know what? That makes me a little bit of side incomes, kind of side hustle, but it's also fun because you get to not only look at how syllabus is now. At least I didn't study much in India, so don't know much about here. But from what I hear from other people and from what I know of the older books that were here when I came here and started studying, and it's the contrast is night and day. Like modern textbooks kind of have lost a lot of that feel, and they've gone for more homogenized contentization. Like-
they don't do like local history stuff. It's like, oh, this building used to be
Yeah.
a prison.
Ooh,
My old high school out in Utah was a prison that they kept polygamous Mormons in.
Really?
I also kind of do not like how entire religious organization like the Mormons have so much political control in the United States, especially in Utah, where they're literally hunting a guy for fucking Legos for a child's toy. This is ridiculous.
Well, the Utah Mormons are, I think they're more of an agenda setter than they are the actual decider. Because if you look at Utah's politics, it's very much dominated by out-of-state interests like Pacific Corp being a big one. They were really big in the lobbying for a tax on solar panels. in a state that still uses coal to
Jesus.
power a major city. Like, and Scripps Media is a big lobbyist in Utah and stuff like that. The LDS Church acts more of like a power broker than of the people directly in charge of the state. Like, they don't, their political power lies more in the fact that they have the leverage to stop something they don't like from happening. Because, for example, like when they did the whole thing with the changing the religious identification codes in the military, it took one tweet from Mike Lee in Utah for that to stop. Or with the Boy Scouts of America when they admitted girls, all they had to do was make some phone calls, because they have the leverage they have is the fact that people actively want to compete for their support. Like they make themselves valuable members of whatever winning coalitions exist, but they're never the ones that are directly dictating policy, at least in my observation.
I see.
It's also a complex state
Still-
because people think that it's all like just this one block of conservative Mormon politics, but like Salt Lake City is a very liberal city, and
But when
both
compared to other liberal cities, it's rather conservative.
well, but it's fairly socially liberal. It's also fairly like there's a major ecological crisis in Salt Lake City, right? So like there's
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot of what we would consider very left of center environmental policy that I think goes a lot further in Utah than people expect it to. Because
There's arsenic under the lake bed.
yeah, I mean that's
So-
literally like that's being like released as the lake shrinks, so like plumes of arsenic will drift through the city or some insanely like apocalyptic dystopian sounding thing that is just absolutely wild to have to contemplate. But
I
like,
can't
they're
believe-
literally dealing with it. Yeah.
I can't believe the Klingons are literally just throwing fucking ships at them. It
I
has
swear,
become
I cannot win
department.
wars. I cannot win wars against the Klingon Empire here because they are just relentlessly human waving me to oblivion. I managed to free one of our little fleets here to try to clean up, because what they're going to do is completely wear down our war exhaustion and then grab 2 or 3 systems that they've managed to occupy. It's what they did the last war, and it's what they're going to do this one, unless we can kind of like mop some of this up to where we can hold the line and just push them back a little before I'm forced into a status quo peace deal. It's like, I know this is not one of those Paradox games that gives you a like Hearts of Iron style body count, but like the death toll for the Klingon Empire has to be like in the millions here. Just continual wave attack.
Like, you know what? This reminds me of like space battles in Legend of the Galactic Heroes, where it would be like, you know, the narrator is like, 40,000 ships fought here with 18,000 ships, and there were 2.5 million casualties. And I'm like, a single battle had 2.5 million casualties?
I feel like when it comes to a lot of science fiction, like they get the sense of scale is either like it's just incomprehensible to the human brain, or they just go with it being way smaller than it should be. Because like
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Legend of the Galactic Heroes is one of those where it makes it believable, because turns out the actual fucking society is crumbling due to the manpower losses incurred in war. And there's also the issue of, you know, you don't have infinite fleets, and once you overextend, it's you know, it's Jover.
It's over. Ah.
It's I may be a very well-read man, but even I cannot resist the allure of the brain rot, of the language, of the internet masses.
It is it is a whole like dialect that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are bringing into existence that I think is going to have a real lasting impact on the English language. I say this as the father of a 13-year-old who brings all of this stuff home to us all the time. but like I really do see there being a lasting impact on the English language with what Gen Z is doing and what Gen Alpha are doing.
Like a lot of times, I try to make my writing a bit more palpable to the common person, because otherwise I'll use words like polemic, like serendipitous.
Hmm.
I'll use words like I'll use these words, like, really, like, because these are the words I read in, the works of Dickens, the works of Doyle, all those really old writers.
Hmm.
And people will be like, Bro is subscribed to English Premium.
That's not a
That
bad
is
thing,
funny.
though, in my
It is
opinion.
not bad.
Yeah.
I enjoy English
Not a
Premium.
yeah, not a bad thing. It does make me feel a bit older. Like, even though I'm 22, I feel like I'm like 42, 32 or something.
You just have to mix those words with brain rot so it becomes utterly incomprehensible.
So
Oi, Mike,
you
would
reduce
you
your
like
audience
to
to
Serendipitous was
solve
zero.
goated.
this? Would you like to settle this rather arduous altercation with a little bit of 6-7?
Exactly.
It's the I find you approach the question with the most skibbity perspicacity that one could comprehend. No, I like
I'm gonna
it,
kill myself.
but there is I really do think though that there is a strong case to be made that English has never been a prescriptive language. There's never been a board in charge of
Yeah,
determining what the correct English to speak is. And so there are
yeah,
times where it enters rapid change and there are times where it is sort of solidifies. I think we're going into a very
tactics.
rapid change phase for the language. So I'm happy to sound like the
Yeah.
oldster that I am. Like I will mostly just make my kid cringe when I try to use her slang, but but I welcome that. I mean, change is the way of the universe.
Yeah,
So bring it on.
I do I do think it isn't bad. I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, brain rot is bad. The language is bad." It's not bad. It's neither good nor bad. It's like these paradigm shifts are morally neither good or bad, especially in language, because how the French language evolved. It evolved through centralization. I think it is in the merit of the English language that it is the way it is. Because, a comparison, when we talk about India, uh, I speak a local dialect of the Hindi language. It used to be its own language, but then got, subsumed into Hindi when the country became independent. And it also, and when I talk to my maternal grandma, who is unfortunately illiterate, she lives in India, and she cannot read or write, and the way she speaks is very alien to me. But now, like, slowly I got to understand her better and learn my own like traditional language a lot better. But when when I was super young, my primary language is English, a little bit of Hindi at home, and a little bit of Punjabi as well. I talked to her and I could not understand what she would say, because she's like, she didn't even got like the way she used to refer to the days of the week was much different.
Hmm.
Like in Hindi, you call Thursday Braspatwar. She used to call it Jumerat, which is weird. It's not a term of Hindi, it's a term of Urdu,
Hmm.
where it's like Jumerat is, the day before Jumma, which is Friday. And she also called Friday Jumma, and I didn't know. So one day she was like, you know, bring me this particular plant on Jumeirah, but bring this plant on Jumma for religious right. And I was confused. I bought both of the plants on Friday because I did know Juma is Friday, but I do not know what Jumeirah is. So I bought both of those plants on Friday, and she was extremely mad that day. Yeah, but yeah, basically Hindi as a language is now more homogenized, and the way they did this is not through actual force or like a board. It's just that the Hindi of people who lived in the cities was deemed Shuddh Hindi or pure Hindi, and the
Mhm.
Hindi of people who did not live in the city, the rural dialects, Bhojpuri, Haryanvi, Mathurai, they all became Ashuddh Hindi or impure Hindi. And there was this politics of purity of the Hindi language that then arose,
Mm.
which right now has become less and less radical because of the fact that, the Hindi language itself has come under flack because of the fact that it was realized a lot of local languages were being wiped out because
Mhm.
of that language. So there was a paradigm shift in preserving local languages.
There was
But
a conventional wisdom for a long time that there was widespread dialect loss in English, and that sort of English language was becoming homogenized with mass media and television and movies and all of that. And I think that I could be wrong. Somebody may come along who's a linguist and tell me I'm an idiot, but I do think that consensus has sort of reversed itself
Yeah.
now, and that we're seeing more divergence in English geographically in spite of us all sharing the same media sources. Um, I think we're seeing a lot more like
yeah,
innovation and change and deviation, both
That's pretty
internationally,
accurate.
like types of British English getting further than types of American English, but also American English bifurcating in new and interesting ways.
Yeah, like the
yeah,
time a lot
like
of toddlers started speaking in British English because of Peppa Pig.
yeah,
Yeah, so I mean,
I
like
can
there is
speak
that,
in
but yeah.
I can speak in British English, and I can speak perfectly in the Kings. I have no problem with that. But you know, I can speak in that language, but I feel more comfortable with the American. Like,
Yeah.
why would you say going to when you can just say gonna?
Well, see,
It's more
Gunna
easy to
is
remember.
in my dialectical version of American English too. I come from Northern California, and unlike Southern California, that is really distinct. Northern Californians pretty much just get told we don't have accents, but we definitely incorporate all the Gunnas. I say Trina, which drives my wife insane.
Yeah.
And since it drives her insane, I'm trying to stop it, but I but I can't. Um, uh, and so yeah, we definitely have that sort of that muddling of you know non-standard conjunctions or yeah
But you never
contractions.
write it out. You
Never
never
write
write
it
it.
out. Never write it out. Absolutely incorrect to
I
write it
would
out.
see that it bothers me. I see people saying gonna like writing it out like that's becoming normal. It freaking bothers me every time it happens. Like that's not right. There's something not right about that.
But see, you're
The boy ain't
talking
right.
again. You're talking to an old.
That boy ain't right.
I'm in my early 40s, so I agree with you fully that you should never type out Trina or Gunna or any of that sort of stuff. But I also learned to type on an IBM Selectric typewriter. And I still, on social media, will double space after a period, something that I have friends that mercilessly mock me for. Um,
Oh, the military forces you to do that.
oh, yeah? Is the U.S. military still
Yeah.
insists
AR
on.
2550.
Yeah?
All military correspondence has to have double spaces after periods.
Well, good. The military still do that notoriously progressive institution, the United States military. I'm
Right.
sure. I'm sure they're
Oh,
riding the
say,
wave of the
can
future.
you see my love be
See?
Oh. Yeah, but so I'm with you that it shouldn't be written, but in spoken English, that is definitely within my dialect. All of those sort of things. So I'm with you there too.
In my writing, I use that to denote I do use that because it's stylish. It's like a stylistic choice, not much of a.
Well, an artist can be
There's a
heterodox.
signal to the audience, right? Like about the person who's speaking.
Yeah, I mean, my protagonist is a rough and tough guy who just went to West Point. He's not really an intellectual. What are you gonna do?
West Point is a brutal school to go to.
I know. He wasn't even like an American who went there. He was like, sort of like transfer student. So
Yeah. Oh, they do that. Yeah.
because I do know a couple of people in my family who went there, and
Really?
a lot of people. Yeah, like they were. I have I have basically family anywhere because it is village tradition that anyone who was a member of your village is family.
Hostile Xenofleet engaged.
So that's why I say family because we're somehow related. If we cannot even marry into our villages because that's consanguineous, and our clan, unlike a lot of Hindu clans, is against consanguine. We do not marry within our clan. We do not marry within our village. We do not marry within our neighboring villages, even. But beyond that, everything is fair game. Yeah, I mean, I have a relative who was literally the fucking prime minister of India. What are you talking about?
Which prime minister?
Uh, I'll send it in chat. He was really swell guy. He was only prime minister for 6 months. This
Oh.
time.
That seems like right about the right amount of time to be a prime minister. I think
Honestly, yeah.
I can imagine it being fun for 6 months.
Yeah, I mean his time was not very fun, mostly because of the fact that it was one of the more politically.
Yeah, no,
Like-
they usually aren't fun when it's short like that. That was a little bit of my joke. But hey, he beat Liz Truss by like a lot, right?
Yeah, he did.
So you got that. You always have that one.
Yeah. Because there's that, and yeah, his name was Charan Singh, and he was my maternal grandfather. To this day, is like a very big follower of him. So, yeah, like we literally, they tell us stories of whenever there was like villages where our clan is a dominant one. His mere name would basically have people come out with bags of coins as
Oh.
donations to his political party. Yeah.
One of our stations is under attack.
All right. Well, we've hit 3:00, which was my intended
We have
stopping
mastered
time.
the
I
new
actually
technology.
think I've done the impossible and kind of stabilized this insanity that we've been doing in the background this whole.
Wait, is it 3:00 p.m. for you guys?
What's that?
Over. Is it 3:00 p.m.?
Oh yeah, I'm
for you
sorry.
on the East Coast?
I'm in the Eastern time zone. It's 3:00 Eastern.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I know it's I don't even know what time is it for you guys right now?
It's like 12:30 a.m. here, so
Yeah.
it's not sleeping time
Uh,
because I slept the whole day because I'm sick. So I'm like probably gonna wake up for the whole night.
Yeah, it's 10 in Djibouti.
Well,
PM.
I'm happy that I could contribute to your evenings and get some sleep, guys. Thanks for joining me. It's always fun to have these conversations. I think we've kind of reached a point
Yeah.
in the video in the video game. I think we have reached a point where I finally stabilized this insane military situation. Where eventually we're just gonna collapse in exhaustion and basically all go back to the original borders. But thanks, Klingon Empire. Apparently, big old jerks in this mod, which is probably appropriate.
Yeah.
But if
Exactly.
anybody else is wondering how these guys got to chat with, join the stream and chat, that's because they're volunteers with Project Liberal. So join the Project Liberal Discord, reach out to us, ask to be a volunteer, and you could join the conversation very literally, or just check out any of our streams and jump in the chat on whatever platform you're on. And happy to see and read those comments as well. All right, guys, have a wonderful night. I'll catch you probably
Yep.
sometime next week.